here today. First of all, I hope that you and your families are keeping safe during this terrible pandemic. This meeting is being held remotely and the public are excluded. This is the 5th time that Falkirk Council has met remotely. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed. A video recording will be posted online on the Council's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. If members wish to speak, you should physically raise their hand or indicate using the chat facility. It's hopeful that during the course of this meeting that will ensure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. I'll also advise you that there will be introductory comfort breaks at appropriate times in the meeting. I'll now hand you over to Mr. Moody, who will take the sederant. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Provost Buchanan.
Present.
We have apologies from Deputy Provost Ritchie. Councillor Aitchison.
Here.
I see him there, aye.
Here, did you know?
Yes, Councillor Aitchison is present. Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Balfour.
Councillor Balfour. Is Councillor Balfour there? There he is.
Trying to join the meeting. He was struggling a minute ago, I think.
He's there, Colin.
Okay, present. Councillor Binney.
Present.
Councillor Bissett.
Present.
Councillor Black. Present. Councillor Blackwood.
Present.
Councillor Bowes.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Colley.
Present.
Councillor Coombs.
Here.
Councillor Flynn.
Present.
Councillor Garner.
Present.
Councillor Goldie.
I assume.
Councillor Grant.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Kerr.
Present.
Councillor McHugh.
Present.
Councillor McCluckie.
Here.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
Present.
Councillor Monroe.
Present.
Councillor Murtagh.
And shut.
Councillor Nicholl.
Present.
Councillor Nimmo.
Present.
Councillor Patrick.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
And Councillor Spears.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Moody. That takes us on to item 2 in your agenda papers, as declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interests they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations at this time?
Falkirk Community Trust.
None. Yeah.
Provost, do you want all 5 of us to say that we're members of the trust?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay then, Colin. Okay. Fine, thank you. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda this morning, Falkirk Community Trust. And we'll take the first item, which is 3A, Falkirk Community Trust Business Plan. It's pages 3 to 7 on your agenda papers, and the report is by Mr. Smale. Thank you, Mr. Smale.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning to all. Council, at its meeting on the 2nd of December, accepted the Trust's suggestion that there should be further dialogue on possible savings options. This report updates Council on the outcome of that engagement. The Council was represented by the 3 group leaders, the Chief Executive and the Chief Finance Officer, and the Trust by the Chair and their Chief Executive. There were 2 meetings held, one before Christmas, 18th December, and one after on the 6th of January. Para 4.2 gives Council, I think, a sense of the range of points covered at the meeting. Of course, it doesn't purport to be exhaustive, it's not a minute, but hopefully gives you a good sense of the range of comments and points that were discussed and what was a very positive and constructive engagement. Flowing from that, as you can see at paragraph 4.3, several criteria emerged which would inform an assessment of possible savings actions. As noted, they relate, or those relating to the strategic property review and community engagement, wouldn't be aligned time-wise with possible savings actions for 21-22. But there were two options identified, as noted at para 4.3, that were compatible with the criteria. The application of a proportion of the Trust's reserves and the emergence of a new community membership scheme. And as the paragraph shows, we've taken a prudent view of the yield that may come from such a scheme. So the combination of those is 650,000, and that would be available to be set off against the updated and revised estimated trust deficit for 21-22 of 3 million. That takes us back to the recommendation promised at 2.1, and as you can see, it's fairly straightforward. Happy to take any questions members may have. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Smale. We'll go out to the leader, Councillor Meiklejohn. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and my thanks to Mr. Smale for the report, and indeed to the other group leaders and the Trust for the time that they've taken to pull this together at relatively short notice. I think where we are has taken cognizance of the bigger picture that's being played out as part of this global pandemic. And indeed, the original estimates that were brought forward have to be acknowledged that the 4.5 million deficit has been amended, but the explanation around that was that assumption had been factored in prior to any known timescale and rollout for the vaccine. So having taking that into account, it's helpful that that's been able to be amended, and it is still an estimate, and we will need to wait and see how that plays out. I think great thanks to the Trust and recognising that the pressures on the council budget have looked to their own, and indeed their own reserves position, and putting part of their reserves into the pot, I think has been very helpful. I think what we've got is a pragmatic way forward, considering the circumstances in which we're in, and I'm happy to move the recommendations that we note this report and thank the Trust for their work in pulling this together.
Okay, thanks for that. Have you got a seconder?
Happy to second the reserving the right.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Bissett now.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to pay a personal tribute to everybody that's been involved in the pandemic and working together to try and bring a resolution to this. It almost feels like a wartime effort where everyone's fighting a common enemy, so I'm very grateful for that. Previously, we agreed proposals for the Trust, scenario 2, where the projected deficit is predicted to be 3 million. I think this scenario was the most cautious and pragmatic choice. The Trust did bring forward proposals to close the deficit fully Unfortunately, only 2 were chosen, as the others had compulsory redundancy implications, shall we say, and withdrawals from venue impacts which we could not consider. We are therefore left with 2 options that the Trust presented: the use of reserves, 500,000, community membership scheme, which may generate £150,000. These savings would reduce the deficit by £650,000. I have to say the meetings with the Trust Chairman, Maureen Campbell, Chief Executive and Council Group leaders, Kenneth Laurie and Mr Smale, were amicable, open and transparent and conducted in a professional manner, for which I am very grateful. The Labour Group have further considered the proposals brought forward and unanimously agreed to accept the proposals to reduce the deficit by £650,000. So we agree the recommendations as well, Provost. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Similar to Councillor Meikle-John and Councillor Bissett, the meetings that we had with the Trust and the Council were very constructive. We all wanted to reach the same goal, and whether it was 4.5, whether it was 3 million, any options, the Council has agreed to pay that money. So having option 2, as Councillor Bissett says, it eases the pressure on our overall budget. No that it's going to be easy, but it certainly makes it a lot a wee bit better. So our group is supporting the option 2 and the recommendations, Provost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know, we have a motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendation. There's no amendment coming forward, so the recommendation is agreed. Thank you. That takes us now on to item 3B, Community Trust Future Options. It's pages 8 to 26 on your agenda paper, and the report will be coming forward from our Chief Executive, Mr. Laurie. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, everybody. This report is brought forward as a direct response to the motion agreed by the Council on the 30th of September and is set out in paragraph 1.2, and of course is continued from the December Council meeting. So in that context, I'll endeavour to be relatively brief in my introduction. So the purpose of the report is clearly to provide information on the matters that were set out and in the motion where further information was requested, and to invite the Council to decide whether it wishes to maintain the current arrangements with the Trust, establish a project to bring the Trust back in-house, or indeed identify any other course of action which it may consider to be appropriate. So section 3 of the report gives some background to the Trust and some of the more recent history in terms of Council decisions, which members will of course be familiar with. And specifically in September of 2018, we had the options appraisal report presented to the Council, which set out 3 options in terms of the status of the Trust. And the decision taken at that stage was to maintain the current arrangements, but to ensure that a stronger and more effective partnership with the Trust came about as a result of that. So subsequently, later that year, the Council agreed a vision document for how we would take that work forward. At the centre of that was a savings and investment plan for a 5-year period, and that would clearly link in to the strategic property review. In June of 2019, a number of specific proposals were brought forward to take that, to move that work on and to provide a framework for the savings and investment plan. And at that stage, the Council agreed to delay implementation until full engagement and consultation had taken place. That consultation then followed. There's been a series of further reports as detailed to the council. And we got to the position whereby it was agreed that this all needed to be taken forward based on the outcomes of the strategic property review. The council is currently consulting on the draft implementation plan for the SPR, which was agreed in the latter part of last year. That work, of course, has been delayed and disrupted by the pandemic, but it is progressing, and there will be a report back to the council in the spring or early summer of this year. Turning to section 4 of the report. In line with the decision of the council in September, there are 3 appendices attached to the report which set out the information requested. So Appendix 1 deals with the advantages and disadvantages of bringing the trust back in-house. Appendix 2 looks at the process, the work, the indicative timelines that would be involved in that, and the risk factors are set out at Appendix 3. And there's quite a lot of detail in there, but I suppose to boil it down to the fundamentals, the main advantage one would consider bringing the trust back in-house is about decisions can be taken as a single, by the council as a single decision maker in line with its agreed priorities. This should lead to a more integrated and streamlined approach, taking to treatment and use of facilities in line with the strategic property review. And there would also be potential savings and efficiencies through an assessment of the duplications of posts and work which currently may exist, and a review of the structural arrangements. So a number of advantages, but that key issue is about the single decision maker and that having that taken forward by a single organisation rather than 2. There are also a number of disadvantages set out in Appendix 1, but the key disadvantage clearly is the financial one, the loss of rates, relief savings that the charitable status of the trust allows, and that amounts to 1.35 million a year, though it is noted that would be partially offset by a VAT benefit. So in taking a decision on this matter, the council requires to carefully balance the advantages and disadvantages, and in particular, it requires to balance the loss of the current savings of circa 1.1 million per annum with the advantages that could result from the council being the single decision maker. And the point that I make in paragraph 4.5 of the report is that that status as a single decision maker is only an advantage if the council is prepared to take the types of decisions required in terms of property investment and rationalisation, which will help achieve the level of savings required to help close the council's budget gap and to ensure the provision of excellent facilities and services for our communities. And no one's suggesting that that's an easy balance to strike. It's a journey we've spoken about a lot in the context of the strategic property review, and whether the trust remains or whether the services are in-house, that remains a fundamental challenge for us as a council. Appendix 2 to the report sets out the process and the indicative timescale should a decision be taken to bring the trust back in-house. Given the complexity of the processes involved, so that's about seeking approval from the Scottish Charity, the engagement and consultation that would need to take place with a number of parties, including employees and trade unions, communities and external funding bodies and grant providers. It's anticipated that 6 months would be a minimum time that would take, and indeed it would be better to have a longer period to do that. In that context, and considering the benefits of aligning the reintegration of the trust with the beginning of the financial year, a target transfer date would be suggested of the 1st of April 2022 if members take the decision to bring the trust back in-house. And as I said previously, the risk factors associated with that are set out for members in Appendix 3 of the report. As requested by the Council, consultation has been undertaken with the Trust, and a response to a draft of the report is set out at Appendix 4, the response that was received from the Trust. So turning, Provost, to the recommendations at Section 2, it is recommended the Council considers and determines whether to maintain the current arrangements or to commence work to bring the Trust back in-house with a target date of the 1st of April of next year, or indeed identify any other course of action which it considers appropriate at this stage. And if, recommendation 2, if it decides to bring the Trust back in-house, authorises myself or indeed my nominee to develop the detailed project plan and to prepare and execute all and any resolutions required for that purpose, and agrees to receive further reports in the event any issues arise that would have a significantly adverse impact on the project or indeed on the anticipated timescales. Thank you, Provost. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Laurie. I'll go straight to the leader, Councillor Meikle-John. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Excuse me. And thank you to Mr. Laurie for setting the scene. And this is now the second time we've been here with this. In fact, actually it's the third, because we did actually look at the options appraisal previously, and we agreed the status quo, but that was agreed on the premise that we look to make this work and work effectively. Yet we find ourselves back in that same cycle yet again of asking the Trust to bring forward a suite of savings that we don't like, don't bring them back again, go and find other things. And that there's just been the lack of understanding that the Trust don't have too many ways to go in order to find savings, with 60% of their budget going on staff, 19% buildings, and 21% is what they have to play with, and a lot of that is around income. We want them to grow their income, but we're not able to give them the tools by which to do that. And we don't have the ability to make investments that would then enable more suitable facilities that would increase footfall, make it more attractive, because we don't have the decision making to actually shed some of the older buildings that are no longer fit for purpose and inefficient, and we continue to go in this cycle without an outcome, and that's why I think the status quo is no longer sustainable. Members have clearly said that they want to have more influence and say within the Trust to the way the services and that are run. We want more democratic accountability by members for our communities. And I therefore believe by having a single decision maker, that will bring all of that power to us, but also the responsibility about making some of those very, very difficult decisions. But without those decisions, then we can't actually make the transition that we want to make. I do, however, feel that had a previous report been accepted, whereby we were looking at a pot of £50 million worth of investment in the Trust facilities, we might have been at a slightly different point and had moved on, and may well have had a better ongoing relationship there with the Trust, that we could actually build these foundations on. But we're not. We're in a cycle where we just aren't getting the best for our communities, and that's where we are. Progress in the SPR has been very slow and very difficult. Again, it's because these decisions that have been put in front of members are difficult, and we can't hide from taking those decisions any longer. We need to be thinking of the best interests in our communities, and if we want to invest in good quality facilities, then we will have to think about letting go. But I don't believe that we are going to be in a position to do that with the trust sitting as an arm's length organisation, and not having that real responsibility. By bringing the trust back in, as the Chief Executive said, there's the ability to streamline services, create a more integrated approach, taking away the bureaucracy, and that would be of great benefit to us. And it's something we've continually tried to do and failed. So there is no one blame, I believe, whether it be the trust or the council. I think collectively we've not done our best. And again, one of the ways of doing that is by bringing the trust back in-house. It's a year-long plan in order to be able to do that. It has to be a managed process. It has to be carefully managed. We need to engage with staff. We need to engage with trade unions in all of this. So it's done in a way that people have confidence and feel involved. Similarly, members will want to be involved in developing that picture and that vision for the trust as we go forward and as it is brought into the council. And therefore it's important that we have a project plan and with key milestones so that members are kept up to date with the progress and indeed any of the challenges that are presented. And I do believe there will be challenges that will be presented to us, but those are ones that we need to work through and find solutions to. Therefore, Provost, I'm going to move the following motion. For the reasons set out in the Chief Executive's report, I would move that Council agrees to A, commence work to bring the trust back in-house with a target transfer date of the 1st of April 2022, and request that Chief Executive develop a detailed project plan for bringing the trust back in-house, including key milestones, and report this to the June meeting of the Council. And I'm hopeful that members will be able to support this and allow us to move forward into a new working environment where we can continue to work on developing our leisure and culture services and do it in a way that we are able to give the best to our communities and be accountable to our communities in doing that. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. We'll put the motion on screen for everybody, but have you got a seconder at this time?
Provost, I'm delighted to second the motion just moved by a leader and the right to reply.
Okay,
Reserve the right to reply.
thank you. Just to let you know that Mr. Perry is going to email you as well. Thank you. Okay, I think everybody had an opportunity there to see the motion. Now going to open it up. I'll go to the Labour, Councillor Bissett. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Just to touch on before I start, the 50 million the leader talked about, a large chunk of that was for HQ Arts Centre, and the remainder was for improvements. It was to go out to consultation, so I'll just leave that there. Provost, in September 2018, when the trust issue was raised at Council, my feeling at that time was that the trust should be brought in-house in order to have more joined-up thinking and a one-council policy approach. About 6 months or so ago, I asked myself what was I basing my decision on, and decided to do research on the trust and do some critical thinking. The first thing I asked myself was, what has changed since the last review of the trust? And nothing has changed. And the decision at that time was to keep the trust status as it is. So I even wonder why we're looking at this again. The principal reason for keeping the trust as an ALIO is a financial one. The rate saving is approximately £1 million per year. This money is invested in retaining and developing culture and sports provision. In addition, the trust has grown customer income from 3 million to almost 8 million per year, and has achieved 6 million in external funding. The cost to the council has decreased as the subsidy has reduced year on year. Bringing the trust back in-house will not change the financial deficit and will simply place a greater burden on the council due to the loss of rates relief and external funding. So it makes no sense in this current climate to be even considering this. The people we serve will be absolutely astounded if the council is throwing away £1 million when we are facing budget cuts of £76 million over the next 5 years and subsequent job losses. Economic recovery after the pandemic is going to be hard enough, and recovery will continue for a number of years, not just this year. The Trust Chief Executive attends the Council fortnightly corporate management team, and the Trust actively contributes to the Capital Planning Working Group, Asset Management Group, various community planning groups, Council HQ and Arts Centre Group, as well as various ad hoc groups. So there's plenty of interaction with the Council. There are 5 councillors on the board, representing 50% of its makeup. The Trust performance is reported to external scrutiny. In addition, the Trust business plan is submitted annually for approval and agreement, so the actions of the Trust at a strategic level are influenced by the Council. So there is clearly no democratic deficit, and the Council have had many opportunities to bring about change but haven't taken them. And let's not forget why we are asking the Trust to make cuts. And yes, they are cuts, they're not savings. We are making these cuts as a result of SNP Tory austerity. How many families would £1 million have helped support? I wonder if the potential portfolio holder, Councillor Spears, has any ideas how he would fund the service in-house. Having been elected as an independent, he may have different ideas from the SNP. In conclusion, the Labour Group have unanimously agreed that the Trust should remain as it is for reasons I have just outlined. It is beyond foolishness to bring the Trust back in-house. It is not in the interest of the Trust, the Council, or most importantly, the people we are elected to serve. If the Tories and the SNP want to bring the Trust back in-house, with national and local elections coming up, I'm sure the public will remember this incredulously wrong, irresponsible and costly financial decision of the SNP and the Tories. And Provost, I would move that I recommend 2.111, maintain the current arrangements with the Trust at the present time. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you for that amendment. Have you got a seconder? Councillor
Provost,
Coombs.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, as the leader has just said, and the Chief Executive, and we can all see it here today, that essentially the report we've got in front of us is exactly the same that we saw in December. And I said in December that bringing the Trust back in-house was mad, bad and irresponsible. Well, it was mad, bad and irresponsible in September and December, and even more so today. Making a decision like this while we're dealing with a global pandemic is not just irresponsible, it's almost completely mad. I cannot believe that I've just heard the Leader of the Council saying that we're reviewing it again because we want to see it working more effectively. At what point in any report or the Trust's annual review was there no effectiveness? Nobody's questioned the effectiveness of the Trust. Every measure that she mentioned regarding income, regarding participation, it's all there in black and white showing that the Trust has been successful. What they need to do now is stop deluding the public here and admit this isn't about trust, this is personal. I further hope that the public can not only see that they're throwing £1 million of their money away, but that yet again the administration here is being shored up by the Tory group. The Tory group leaders seconding a proposal that's going to cost over £1 million when the council is about to go through yet more savage cuts. It's mad. And it's mad because it will cost the council that extra £1 million a year. In reality, of course, it will cost a lot more than that. The Trust has also brought in between £5 and £6 million worth of external funding that would simply not be available to an in-house organisation. I dare anybody that supports this to explain why they're throwing that £1 million of public money away. It's a mad idea. Now, I'm happy to admit no organisation is perfect, but the Trust has done all it's been asked for. Prior to COVID, they had reduced their costs, increased revenue. I'm repeating myself here, from 3 million to 8 increase in revenue. How can you say that's not been successful? By any objective measure, it's been a success. And I find it hard to understand why the Tory and SNP councillors think that replacing representative board of directors with Councillor Spears could possibly be a good thing. Indeed, the people of Bo'ness might like to remember that the last time Councillor Spears was in charge of leisure facilities, he tried to close Kinneil Museum. I'm sure they won't have forgotten. It's a bad idea because Falkirk Council is blessed with a range of facilities accessible to all of our communities. Admitted, as the leader says, they're not perfect. That's because of the underfunding that we're getting. And to change these facilities and offer a couple of porta cabins in a high school is not what our constituents want. And neither is it what the staff of the Trust want, especially is it what this after a year of being furloughed, which incidentally wouldn't have happened. It would have cost the council another £3 million had they been council employees. It's a bad idea. And it says so. At 4.3 in the report, it states that the advantage of making the Trust a council department would be that decisions could be taken by the council as a single decision maker. Two important points here, Provost. Firstly, there are already 5 councillors on, as Councillor Bissett just alluded to. And secondly, I'd like to know exactly what decisions those councillors think they're going to be taking. Is it decisions about the pace of the measure? Is it not happening fast enough? Is that what it is? Or maybe decisions what services should be cut to find that extra £1 million for the rates bill every year. Let me be clear here, bringing the Trust in-house will speed up these closures. Bo'ness Rec Centre, Denny Leisure Centre, and both Bo'ness and Grangemouth Town Halls. This isn't speculation, by the way. This is the inevitable consequence of paying an extra £1.35 million in rates, as is stated in 4.4 of this report. I can't believe it's all written there in black and white and we're still kidding each other on. This proposal will increase the budget, as is clearly stated in the paper, and the net loss to the council is going to be £1.1 million. This is nothing short of madness. It's irresponsible because we see here is the result of Tory and SNP governments slashing the budgets for our funding. And the local counterparts of those parties are shirking their responsibility. People that they should be protecting at a local level, they should be hanging their heads in shame. Finally, Provost, what's the problem that this is meant to be solving? Democratic accountability. Well, no one can truly believe that one. This move is a sham, and it's an expensive sham that will cost our residents £1.1 million every year ongoing, not a one-off, don't forget that. Any rational person that's reading this report would be asking, where is the business case for this proposal? Because it just doesn't add up, which kind of makes you wonder why the SNP and Tory councillors have been working together in the support of this idea. Budget time? The problem with the Trust has is exactly the same as the council has. It's that chronic underfunding of local government. Bringing the Trust in-house doesn't change that reality. And both the SNP and the Tory groups know this. If you vote to bring the Trust in-house today, you're voting to close more community facilities and faster. The Labour group stands against this mad, bad and irresponsible proposal. We stand against throwing over £1 million of public money away every year on what's essentially a power trip. That's what we stand for. I'd be interested to know what the SNP and Tory groups stand for. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. Just to clarify the situation, we have a motion moved and seconded, and now we have an amendment moved and seconded. So I'm going to open it up for debate. If you want to speak, would you please raise your hand to ensure that you're not missed out? Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, this common cause with administration may be something that I seldom have. But on this issue, it's important to show a cross-party support in bringing the community trust back in under democratic control. I was not there when the council took the decision to create the community trust, but those who were and supported the move tell me that it was done with high hopes. It was to be a body working closely with the council, yet able to access funding that the council could not. The best of both worlds. Yes, there were members who said that there would be a loss of democratic control and the trust would develop its own agenda. Provost, these members have been proven right, and despite the number of attempts on behalf of the council to reform the relationship, the trust continue on its own trajectory despite the council's continued high level of financial support, due in part to be hoped of the level of external funding failing to materialise. These previous reforms should have been a wake-up call to the trust, but sadly little has changed. And today I am delighted that we are taking the decision to return the trust and its spending of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money back under the control of elected members. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you for your input. I believe that Councillor Nicholl has his hand up. Councillor Nicholl.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. I'm sorry, my had this hand there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Provost, I'm supporting this motion today. I have also done a journey like Councillor Bissett has, only in my case in the opposite direction. I was one of those that Councillor Kerr just alluded to, who perhaps with some misgivings, but in hope of things working out, supported the establishment of the trust all those years ago. And I've got to say that over the years that have been intervening since, my view has changed in the opposite direction from Robert. Everybody is entitled to have this change of mind. Whilst I know that in the early time on the council, Robert was very keen to bring the trust back in-house, I accept that people's views change. Just as I accept that Councillor Coombs, who I had the honour of serving with as a deputy leader in a joint Conservative Labour administration for many years, also now has the right to say that because on this occasion we are finding common cause with the administration, to bring up the red herring that it is some sort of Conservative SNP alliance. Nothing is further from the truth, Provost. This is simply a case where people have, on balance, come to their own conclusions as to the best way forward for the trust. The report from the Chief Executive lists the advantages and disadvantages. And just like anybody involved in politics, people have to weigh these options up and make up their own mind which is preferable. And of course, there is no denying that there are some disadvantages about bringing the trust back in-house. Everybody would acknowledge that. But for my own part, Provost, having considered, I think the advantages do outweigh those disadvantages. and I will be supporting bringing the trust back in-house. Now, that is to some extent a disappointment for me, because the hopes that we had when we set it up, and I think the name of Councillor Adrian Mahoney should be mentioned here. Adrian was a very enthusiastic promoter of the idea of the trust, and to some extent swept people along with him due to his enthusiasm and the backing that he gave the project. Now, I don't know, I haven't happened to see Adrian for some time, but I do know that even he, and I'm not one to put words in his mouth, began to see some issues arising with the detachment of the trust from the council. The council continued to largely support the trust financially to a very large extent. Yes, as Joan has said, some external funding was brought in, but sadly not to what we were told would be the case. So disappointment over the years did creep in, and has, as Councillor Kerr just alluded to, been a number of attempts to reform the relationship, but sadly these don't seem to have improved the position greatly. So rather than go on and on and on, and picking up the point that the leader made, we really do need to draw a line under this. And I certainly have come to the conclusion that on balance, to draw a line, to move on as one body is preferable for our communities. So I will be supporting the motion. Irrespective of who has put it forward, if it's a motion that I believe in, then I will be supporting it. So hopefully no other Labour speaker will talk about nonsense between some collusion between going on between the SNP and the Conservatives, because quite frankly, the next time that we vote, as inevitably we will, because there will be some proposal come forward from Labour that we will want to support, it will be equal nonsense from any SNP member to say that it's collusion between the Labour and Conservative groups. We are our own group, we think for ourselves, we come to our own conclusions, and on this matter, Provost, we have come to the conclusion that the motion being put forward by the administration is the one to support today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your input.
1912,
Councillor
Provost.
Black?
Sorry, 1912, Provost.
Yeah.
Councillor Nimmo said that was alluding to a collusion. I've just done a quick tally there just now, and at least the last 8 council votes, the Tory and SNP groups voted together. So it's pretty obvious what's going on here. Thank you. And at no point did he mention the £1 million of council money that's going to get thrown against a wall.
Okay, thank you. It's Councillor Nicholl you were talking about, though, no Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Black, did you have your hand up?
Provost.
Pardon?
I do, Provost, yes, I do.
Okay, carry on. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. There isn't really a lot to say because it has been said very well before by Councillor Bissett and Councillor Coombs. It's not a good idea. It will cost our communities dearly. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, carry on.
When we were in power, we established the trust. We all know the reasons, and they were good ones. We would save around £1 million a year from not paying rates, and the trust would be able to apply for more external funding as a charity. As I said during the last debate on bringing the trust in-house, we can argue all day about the pros and cons of having our leisure and our cultural services being delivered either in-house or at arm's length. However, the fundamental fact is that setting up the trust has saved us millions, and it's protected services and it's protected jobs. Committing to bringing the trust in-house is a really grave mistake. If it's correct and the Tories and the SNP are going to vote for this, then what they're voting for is more cuts to their communities, and that is shameful. It does sound like this is the set-up, the kind of idea behind what's going to happen next month at budget. That's what it sounds like. This is the deal. But we'll see what the truth is at budget time. But in no way or shape or form is this a positive move that will save money for the council. Currently, we have the strategic property review, and it's been round the block for a long, long time. Well, and that's because none of us want to make those decisions. None of us want to make those cuts. None of us wants to close facilities that are valued by our communities. Voting to bring the trust in-house means those closures are one step closer. How will Councillor Spears, as a portfolio holder, decide what's going to happen? How will he protect those services when there's going to be an extra shortfall in funding? Try selling this to the people in Bowness come the local elections. Bringing the trust in-house won't help save the recreation centre. People want to be able to go swimming at any time of the day. They don't want to have to go swimming before or after school. The reality is we're going to be at least 1.1 million down. That's the reality. Before we even begin to think about the shortfall in income that the trust has suffered in the past 8 months due to the pandemic, before we even think about the extra expense that it costs to open a sports centre in a pandemic. This is the reality, and it's a shocking decision that you're going to be making today. So, Provost, I think it's very irresponsible, and I urge people to reconsider. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you for your input, Councillor Black. Councillor Nimmo, then Councillor Goldie, then Councillor Spears.
Thanks very much, Provost, and I will be quick because I think a lot of what I was going to cover has already been said. What I will say is this: I think it's really astonishing in the current financial climate that we're contemplating even going down this road. We're looking at a £23 million deficit that we're going to have to try and fill. That's a big enough black hole without adding to it, we're adding the trust. 23 million, it might be even higher, we don't know. And I think a lot's already been said about the portfolio holder, Councillor Spears. What facilities is he going to close? We've got to remember he's an independent member. We haven't heard from him yet. He might not agree with it, but closures are going to happen if this is the route that we're going to go down. When's Councillor Spears going to close Grangemouth Sports Centre? There's a whole host of trust facilities that are managed on behalf of the council that he's going to fall responsible for, and he's going to have to ultimately make decisions as to what facilities are closed, and he needs to be held accountable for that. Like I said, Provost, a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so I'm not going to go over it again. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Thank you.
Okay. As you say, Councillor Spears hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet, but he will. Councillor Goldie. You'll need to unmute, Councillor Goldie.
Sorry, Provost. Usually before I get halfway through my speech, you mute me anyway. But I'm saying 40 years ago, but some time ago, when this trust was set up, I was involved in that, and I believed in the trust, and I believe in the trust still, and I actually believe in the way that the council has set up the trust and the way the trust's running. The leader did say that it will be easier to make, because we haven't taken difficult decisions, that it will be easier to do that when it comes in-house. Well, we know where the problems lie. Councillors don't want to take decisions, rightly so, that affect their community. So it's not going to be any different. There's nobody going to volunteer to close anything in their wards. So that aspect of whether it'll be easier to do it or whether we'll do it more willingly just doesn't apply. And maybe like Saul on the road to Damascus, Provost, I'm weary of the name calling. I really am weary of it. The SNP at the start, when the trust was set up, were vehemently opposed to it. They then eventually came around. They wouldn't even take a place on the board at one time. Labour councillors today saying that the SNP and the Tories are ganging up. Well, not so many weeks ago, Labour councillors voted against the Labour Party proposal. So you've got all this mix, and it's not that kind of talk now. And as I say, people, I'm open to target. I realise that. That doesn't help the situation here. The situation here is caused because when Westminster devolved power to the Scottish Parliament, the intention would be that the Scottish Parliament would devolve power down to our communities. The reason we can't do what we need to do in our communities is partly apart the fact that Westminster's money doesn't appear to be enough, and certainly the SNP government doesn't appear to be enough to the Scottish people. So I would say one thing about it, it's a bad deal. There's no question about it. People are entitled to vote for or against. And anybody that's in any doubt about the Tories, well, I've been in administrations with the Tories equally as many times as the SNP. For 10 years, the Labour Party were in administration with the Tories, so there's no difficulty in that. And the projected future would be politically that no one party is ever going to have power. But we do need to stop the name calling. And people are entitled to vote the way we want. And as I say, we even had Labour members vote against the Labour Party motion only a few weeks ago. I think it's a bad deal. I think it's a dangerous deal for the employees of the Trust. There's no argument about that. And I would like to finally thank Maureen Campbell and her people for the work they've done so far and wish them and all the people in the Trust all the best. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for your input, very interesting. Now call upon Councillor Spears for an opportunity. Councillor Spears, thank you. I think he's on mute at the moment.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, sir.
Hi, I tend to agree with Councillor Goldie. It's maybe time to stop the name calling. It's time to stop bringing up falsehoods. And I can say Councillor Coombs regarding the Bowness Museum, she'll maybe know that every budget stuff comes up for consultation, and consultation was taken. People wanted to stay to keep the museum, and we were very happy to do that. But to try and resort to name calling is very sad. I can say when I was convener of the former Leisure and Rec Committee, we had great success. We were part of the Millennium Link project, the Helix, the Antonine Wall project, we brought the Wheel, we brought the Kelpies, and this is what the Trust, in many aspects, has lived off for the last 10 years. Now, Councillor Coombs will know very well as Vice Chairman of the Trust, and she is the Labour Party who wanted to bring the Trust in the first place. I could put my hand up and say I never voted to bring the Trust into the Council, because I believe in the three key cornerstones of why they were elected, and that's responsibility, accountability, and you bring forward confidence. Now, when we had the former Leisure and Rec, let's face it, we brought forward confidence in abundance, and the Trust has lived off what we brought in then to this day. Now, I know most people on the Trust. I got on with them relatively well. I've got a lot of time for the CEO, Maureen Campbell, and a lot of time for the convener, David White. I've got a lot of time for other board members who've worked really hard to try and make a go of the Trust. But under difficult financial times, and as the leader says, the big picture is the pandemic, and the implications are not just for the Council, but also for the Trust. And what comes out of this is going to be drastically different, because we need to realise through this pandemic things need to change. Facilities need to change, and we need to start using facilities in a much wiser way. So when the facilities are used on a multi-purpose basis, that is the future, because keeping pouring money into things that don't pay, can't pay, were never designed for the present and certainly not designed for the future, then we are devolving our responsibility be acting in the best interest of the people that have elected us. They have elected us to carry out and produce stuff to help with the future. As well as most people know, tourism brings in most money to the district. I still believe more than any to this district. That has taken a massive hit this year. We have a lot of work to do, and it would be best to do it in-house so we can prepare and protect this area for the future. On that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Spears, thank you for your input. We now have Councillor Coleman, followed by Councillor Blackwood. Councillor Coleman, sir.
Thank you, Provost. I think, as everyone in the administration and probably other councillors across the groups know, I have a great disdain for the pantomime that full council can dissolve down to. But there are so many pieces of misinformation and exaggeration given in the various Labour group members' submissions that I couldn't really sit back and not correct some facts. I'm also pleased to hear that Councillor Goldie is going to refrain from name calling. I agree wholeheartedly and try and do that myself, and I hope he's able to continue that into the future. I do find it bizarre that members of the Labour group criticise the SNP for having an agreed idea with the Conservatives when they have recently had a shared administration. But hey-ho. So there's been lots of talk about the money, this £1 million in saved rates. Personally, I find it a bizarre idea that an organisation like Falkirk Council that is largely supported by various forms of tax, council tax, and of course indirect taxation that comes from the Scottish Government's monies, has set up a system where they don't avoid paying a form of taxation in the form of rates. I would say that is damaging to the greater good of our economy, but that's just a personal view. Others may go so far as to say that it is in fact local authority tax avoidance and have ethical concerns about that. So on the £1 million, I think it's a easy target to look at, but you're missing the point that, as I've said, it's potentially damaging to the greater good. Because of bringing things in-house, we are hoping to save some money there, and of course the trust then pays the local authority £1 million back every year for professional services. It's a hot debate within the board whether or not the trust gets the value for money in terms of that, but that's for another day. I also think it's very bizarre that the Labour Party have decided to go with the status quo, even though they have excellent representation on the board, and the Labour Party Community Trust member will know that the independent directors of the Trust recently put forward some comments and proposals which called for a change. They said, and I quote, "The status quo is not workable," and yet the Labour Party are bringing forward the status quo. They have not brought forward a concept for change. We are to continue on with the Trust, which I think everyone except them thinks needs to change, and yet there is no alternative. It's just blocking and unproductive and negative, and we see the negativity when members then talk about the SPR. The SPR is a great opportunity for change and improvement of our services. It's a good example of where bringing the Trust in-house would enable the SPR to move quicker. We can then shut facilities which are old and outdated and not fit for purpose, and importantly, and this is the important point, build new ones. This is a hope for the future, not the negativity that's put forward, and we need to work on that, not avoid it. I think that's the sort of points I want to make. It's a sad day for me that this debate is taking this tone, so I'll wind up on that and wait for the vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input, sir. Now call upon Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, this proposal to bring the Trust in-house beggars belief. I mean, we're just taking a decision at 3A on the agenda to allow the Trust to use reserves and create a community membership scheme to try and reduce their current deficit. And here we're proposing the 1st April 2022 to increase the deficit by £1 million. It just doesn't add up. On external funding, any external funding the Trust has brought in the past has been a bonus, because bringing the Trust in-house, that will no longer be available to the Council or to the Trust. And my last point was, I thought we were elected to try and improve services, no cut them. That's exactly what we're doing. Thanks, Provost.
Councillor Alexander, then Councillor McCluckie. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost. This morning's debate, I think, has been a sour one, and I'm really sorry about that, because I think the issue is too important to be a combination of personal attacks on Councillor Spears, mostly, and half-truths and myths, as is the case with much else of what has been said this morning. For example, I'm sure Councillor Black will remember, I'm sure also Councillor Coombs will remember, that there was no proposal to close, in inverted commas, the Kinneil Museum. There was a proposal to transfer the Kinneil Museum to the cinema that was to open at that point in time. Cinema developed under the previous SNP administration. Equally, we've had again the myth that there's been massive cuts in local government spending. If you check the Scottish Government website, you'll find that the local authorities receive around about a third of the funding for the entire Scottish budget. We're receiving a third when Labour were in power. And what we've seen massively from the Scottish Government is additional resources. It wasn't included within the budget figures. It wasn't included within the calculations at that point in time. But significant amounts of money that have come as a consequence of the pursuit of the policies. And the policies, I think, are what should be encouraged here, and it concerns me a wee bit when I hear we can't do this because of external functions, external considerations. The Labour group have been good at that in the past. They can't do something because there's 100 reasons not to do something, and there's only one reason to do something. And when we look at what's on proposal, with for example, we're coming up to the end of the Class 98 contract. I'm just wondering if Labour's newfound enthusiasm for privatisation will find the schools transfer them to another educational provider when the contract comes to an end, and that's a worry for the future. Also, what's a worry for the future is the thought that at a time of radical change that's required throughout the public sector in general, and the local government in particular, for our perspective, that you can't do anything during a pandemic. You can't learn the lessons as we go. It has to be on a retrospective basis. And that is a nonsense. There are going to be significant changes in the way that the public sector in particular operates. And we know that. We know that as collectively, we know it individually, that there will be a major impact. And if there's going to be changes, then it's important that we have the strongest possible card to play. And it's important that we have the ability to look at all of our remits and to make sure that they're all included in that particular process. Because I would hate to think that leisure services, as aware, the services operated by the trust on behalf of the council, will have a less than favourable position forced on it, simply because they're not at the table in any great strength. And as compared to being part of Falkirk Council. So, you know, I think it's time that we were positive, it's time we were ambitious, and it's time that we put aside the negativity, and particularly the name calling. It's not very often that the Councillor Goldie and I agree, but I certainly agree with his comments this morning. So with that, convener, the Provost, I was certainly happy to support the motion. Although I do accept that in some ways it's a bit of a sad occasion, because it's something that was put to us and has failed. Not entirely, but hasn't succeeded entirely either. So we have to ask the question: would it succeed more? Would the prospects of success be more under the duration of a larger body, the Falkirk Council, or will the trust standing on its own 2 feet be sufficient to actually make sure that the changes that are proposed, the changes that are implemented, are changes that suit that particular department and suit where that department sits within the internals of Falkirk Council? That's the important part. The role that Falkirk Council and the trust can have in people's lives after this pandemic is over.
Okay. Thank you for your input, sir. Councillor McCluckie. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Provost. And like I said, there have been some good contributions today to a very important debate. Firstly, I had no problem with, obviously, Councillor Nicholl's explanation why he's voted the way he has.
I've got him next for 2 questions.
As I say, is because Malcolm's always been consistent in his views and honest, and everything he said today was honest. He did support the trust initially, and you know, and started it, and he has changed his view, and he's been quite critical some of the issues, and very inconsistent. I shared the views, to be honest, some of the times, and I was in the working group, and to me the working arrangement should have been a lot closer. But today is all about the financial makeup and the future of the trust, and quite clearly, and that's where I'm disappointed with my Conservative colleagues, because it's down to pounds, shillings and pence, and I thought they would have been more reliant on the facts. We were critical of the trust for maybe they've obviously brought in 6 million outside funding, and maybe we all thought, or some of us thought, we could have maybe drew in more. But the motion today means they'll not be able to draw none. So that 6 million has gone over, you know, over a period of drawing 6 million. The next period, you're not going to be able to draw none. And to hear a councillor saying that a charity should be paying £1 million rates, you know what I mean, and he thinks it's good, as I just can't believe what I'm hearing.
Probably did that get a 19-1 on that, or just the opportunity to collect, Councillor? Respectfully, Councillor McCluckie, the Provost's decision.
If you read the standard orders, you get an after to speak, please.
Thank you, Councillor McCluckie.
Right,
is that the case, Provost?
Provost, can somebody answer the question when he's allowed in?
Far too many interruptions here, Provost.
He'll come in after you finish up, Councillor McCluckie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Provost.
I'm correct as normal. Right, and as I say, but the decision quite clearly is about finance. So we've told them they can't. We've made a decision, or obviously 2 groups have made a decision that they will no longer get the outside funding. We've thrown out the £1 million rates. We have took the reserves in the previous motion, £500,000, and left 100,000. So we can't go back there twice. That's what our Director of Finance, he maybe can answer. Maybe that's what we should do with the council budget. Leave Hitway 100,000. I think maybe that'll be a Labour motion, and see how long it's sustainable in that department as well. It's entirely about finance, as I say. I've had my differences. I've worked with Mrs. Campbell, an excellent officer, before the trust was set up and after, and I sometimes get a row for being a bit strong with officers and directors. The best I've got in 14 years with Maureen's a draw. Get what I mean? And I was very proud of getting a draw on a couple of occasions, because she tells you the truth and she's honest and upfront, and what she says is correct. And quite clearly, she's put forward business cases on a number of times previously, and we are not willing to make the cuts. Well, I hear today for Councillor Coleman, he is willing to speed up the cuts and closures. I'd also like an answer from our Finance Director, because Councillor Coleman was saying we've got to shut all these facilities, but we're going to invest in some, and obviously the Leader of the Council said something similar. Now, my belief was that we were a huge millions of pounds behind in our capital budget. So maybe could the Director of Finance just remind me the gap that we've got this year, where we can't achieve all the things. So I'm just wondering where we're going to get the money to build new facilities on that. So as I say, my view is entirely about pounds, pounds and pence, and quite clearly it makes more sense to keep the board where it is. But members are entitled to their decisions. And to turn on another issue, as what Councillor Alexander said, we talk about the handbag stuff, here we go again, right, that the Scottish Government hasn't made any cuts. Well, and if you talk to the Scottish Government, they'll say that. Well, if you talk to COSLA, they'll tell you exactly what we've been cut, as I says, and for the councils and the budgets. That's why we're discussing 23 million cuts again this year, right? Because we haven't had the money for the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for your input, Councillor McCluskey. We'll try and get your question answered with Mr. Smale. Then we're going to Councillor Coleman, and then we've got Councillor Gardner want to speak as well.
19-1, Provost.
Mr. Smale, would you like to come in?
Provost?
Yes, come in.
Thank you. In terms of revenue, the projected gap for 21-22 is 23 million. As Councillor McCluskey says, there is a very challenging projected gap on the General Services Capital Programme over the life of the programme of something around 180 million. So there's significant and challenging decisions required to bring that into balance. The updated position will be submitted to the all-party member budget working group on Monday, so there'll be an opportunity there, Provost, for members across all parties to review the position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coleman, you've got a 19-1, but you also want to ask 2 questions. Carry on, sir.
Thank you, Provost. There's so many things factually incorrect with what Councillor McCluskey said that it just makes me sad there. But I've taken a breath and I'll stick to my 19-1 and then ask my questions, since I do appreciate I've already had the opportunity to speak. Councillor McCluskey stated that I made the statement that charities should pay rates, which I didn't. I mean, it's just black and white. Look at the recording. I don't know whether he's genuinely misunderstood or it's just part of the pantomime, which is not the case. I won't go into explaining my point again. I just refer any councillor that thinks I said that to the recording. Right, my questions, again, about misinformation. So first of all, I notice that, I just double check before I say this, that Maureen Campbell's on the call, and I wonder if she's still on the call and available to answer a question.
You went mute.
Oh, have I? Sorry.
Okay.
No, some people say no. Okay, so is Maureen Campbell available to answer a question? And I'll ask the question. And the other one, I'll give people time to work that one out. And the other one is just the observation that some people have pointed out that Councillor Spears will be in charge as a portfolio holder of these education and leisure facilities, and I wonder if an officer could clarify how that is different from any other portfolio holder who is in charge of council structural assets, like, for example, the housing portfolio holder or the education portfolio holder, or the list is not exhaustive, but that's my question, point of clarification, because I feel that, again, some misinformation that from the opposition, that somehow having a portfolio holder in charge of assets is somehow strange or inappropriate or abnormal, whereas actually bringing the trust in-house is a normalisation. So that's my first question. Sorry, a bit of a ramble there. Is Maureen Campbell available to answer a question? I'm assuming the silence on the call means that she's not well.
We're trying to get Miss Campbell in.
Okay. Well, that happens. Do you want me to ask my second question, or do you want an officer to answer my first one, Provost?
Well, we'll try. She's trying to get back in, so we'll ask Mr. Moody to come in on your second question. Mr. Moody?
Yes, thank you, Provost. And just to confirm, I understand Ms Campbell had some difficulty with her connection, so she's just rejoining at the moment. But in relation to the question on portfolio holders, I think one important issue maybe to observe here is that the portfolio holder is not a decision maker. The portfolio holder has an important role in policy development and has enhanced responsibilities in the area of their portfolio in relation to the decisions that are made by the executive in particular. And there is no difference between the roles of the portfolio holders in relation to that level of responsibility. So maybe to put matters another way, as Councillor Coleman has asked, is there a difference between this portfolio and the others? No, there's not.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Moody. Is Maureen Campbell back in with us yet? Okay. Would you like to maybe ask your question again, Councillor Coleman? I believe she's with us.
I'll ask my question, and if the connection breaks again, then I'm sure I can get a written reply for Council. I'd also like to thank Mr. Moody for that answer. That was very clear, and I hope your answer gives some comfort to the opposition members that mentioned Councillor Spears, assuming it was obviously a genuine concern. So my question for Maureen Campbell is about funding. We've had 3 Labour councillors make statements that external funding will no longer be available. However, in a board meeting in October, I think it was, I do recall this being raised because obviously board members have a genuine concern about this, and I believe Mrs. Campbell's answer was that the council would still be able to apply for funding. I think specifically that was about Creative Scotland funding, because that was what was the topic there. But my question, I suppose, to Maureen Campbell is generally funding, although I do anticipate the answer to be yes, but no, because obviously the council is a different entity than the trust without charitable status. So that's the question.
Okay, Ms. Campbell.
Good morning, Provost. I'll leave my
Can't hear her as yet.
Good morning, Provost. I'll leave my camera switched off because I have a poor connection. There is, as Councillor Coleman says, a mixed approach to the funding. So there are funds that any organisation can bid for, specifically Creative Scotland. Local authorities can bid to Creative Scotland for funding, and there are other funds that are uniquely available to charities in which the Trust has certainly made application to. So it is a mixed approach in terms of it depends on the fund and depends on the eligibility as to who is able to apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's, again, hopefully gives comfort to Labour Group members, because they gave me the impression, certainly, that they thought there would be no external funding available for education and leisure projects if it became in-house. And thank you, Provost, for the opportunity to ask those questions.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your input. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Provost. Just before I come in, I think there was a 19-1 from Councillor Alexander. I'm not sure if you missed it or not.
Well, I missed it. I didn't. Councillor Alexander, do you have a 19-1?
I did, and it was in response to the comments of Mr. Councillor sorry, I forgot his councillor was.
McCluckie.
McCluckie. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was definitely from McCluckie. In relation to funding, he seems to be doubting the figures that I've quoted, and I was wondering if you could tell me where in the COSLA website there's a contradiction.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Provost, and I too welcome the epiphany for Councillor Goldie. It'll be good to see going forward, from not only him but as many people as possible here. Councillor Coleman asked a really good question there, and that was good clarification, I think, for members of the other parties. Councillor Coleman also made a really good point when he mentioned that some of the board members of the trust are saying that the status quo is not workable. And I wasn't really going to come in here because everybody has said their piece, and I agree with some of the stuff from Councillor Nicholl and Councillor Kerr. But what made me come in was Councillor Blackwood coming in and saying that he was happy with investment, and how he can possibly say that within Ward 3 is beyond me. If he would like to take a walk around the facilities we have and the threatened closures that we have within Ward 3, and I'll say the explanations I get around that in relation to we can use any high school when we've come up with suggestions, for instance, for a gym and fitness suite very similar to what they have in Stennismuir, but for some reason the trust don't think that model would work in Denny. So I find that quite strange that he's saying that. If he wants to go into Denny High and look at their facilities, the gym in Denny High we're actually not allowed to use as members of the public. So just speaking parochially and locally for my community, I don't think the trust model is working for us. I can't speak for other areas as much, but I'm quite surprised at Councillor Blackwood thinking what we've got in this ward is suitable. I, for one, don't, and I will be supporting getting better facilities, fit for purpose facilities in our ward, as maybe there is in some other wards as well. Thank you, Provost.
19-1, Provost.
Okay, thank you for input. As you know, everybody's
19-1,
entitled
Provost.
to their opinion and to put it forward. Have we anybody else
19-1,
now want
Provost.
to speak? Pardon?
19-1.
Carry on.
Provost,
Carry on,
I don't
Councillor
recall, I
Blackwood.
don't recall saying I was happy with investment. I don't recall saying that. In fact, I finished with saying that we were elected to improve services, no reduce them. And I'm certainly not happy with the investments and the facilities and the Banknote and Denny area. Far from it.
Okay, Councillor Blackwood.
For
Point
what reason,
taken.
Councillor
Is there
Blackwood?
anybody else that hasn't spoken like to come in before we go to the vote? Okay, then a wind up by the leader, Councillor Meikle-John.
Provost, I had my hand up, but I don't know if you can see me.
Perfect. I believe that there's two councillors that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
Councillor Murtagh first and then Councillor Reid.
Thanks, Provost. Just to be brief, I think there's been many points made in the debate. I think as what Councillor Garner was just saying in terms of the status quo that is what is proposed. I mean, we've been considering these issues around the trust, certainly, since I've become a councillor. Only my first term as a councillor, but it's been a constant debate every year, and where it is, we appreciate this is a very difficult decision, and there are many aspects of it, and they're laid out in the report. I think personally, what I've heard from many colleagues on all sides is that when the business case comes forward, when the options come forward, when the dialogue is coming forward, the ability for us as a council to make meaningful choices feels very limited. And so it's not a case of saying, well, we just approve a business plan, or we just did, you know, we've not raised on this specific issue or that issue. It's that the structures which are there in our relationship, although you can name whether they've got whether there's representation on this committee or that, they clearly don't produce the results in which councillors are satisfied with in terms of making meaningful structural decisions across the board. And we come to this every single year, at every single point that we look at this relationship again and conclude that it's not satisfactory. We've heard that the board members themselves don't feel the status quo is satisfactory. And I think that at this point, when we look at things objectively and the options that are before us, making a change, you know, it's not a case of making some sort of rash decision in the middle of the pandemic. It's considering that what we've got ahead of us and what we've got to face, we really do have to make these decisions in the best interests of our community. We are going into a period of change, of looking at how we properly and structurally invest in making all our community assets come together within the SPR. And they will involve difficult decisions, but making those decisions with one hand tied behind our back because we can't have proper integrated discussion with what's happening with the trust and what's happening with those trust assets and those buildings, and looking at things in the whole, I think hinders the decisions that we've got to make going forward. And yes, we all know the challenges that we face, but reducing it to another slanging match about you know, whether we get enough from Westminster and the Scottish Government, and, you know, we all know the arguments about that, you know, and the lines that parties have about that. This is about decisions we've got in front of us for our communities just now. We've, as I say, we've been looking at these decisions and papers for the last 3.5 years, certainly, as far in my memory. It's time to properly consider a decision going forward. It might be a difficult one, but I think that on balance, it is the right decision for all the reasons that have already been put, and that this is a decision in making investment going forward for our communities, from the point of view of what we've got to face with so many things going forward with the street property review, as I said, and I support, difficult as it is, the change that we are making today, because it is going to enable us to have proper sight of all the options before us. So I just wanted to contribute that and very much echo the comments about that Councillor Goldie made, and not reducing this to personal matters, which I think unfortunately it has, despite that intervention, come forward with again, yet again in the pantomime that is Councillor Coleman has said.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, and I think we all agree with the words of wisdom to Councillor Goldie. Councillor Reid, I believe you wanted in. I can't see you, but we'll listen to you.
You're lucky in that regard, Provost.
I see you now.
I've never resorted to personal insults at council or anywhere else, and I'm not going to start today, Provost. There are strong arguments for the democratic aspect of things, but I think it's in reality somewhat weak in the case of our trust. Could I ask some questions of officers, please, Provost? First of all, who approves the trust business plan, which is basically its capital and revenue programme? Who are the final arbiters as to whether that goes forward or not?
We'll try and get you an answer. Mr. Smale, do you want to come in on this?
I would make an observation. Yes, Provost, I'll make an observation which colleagues in governance may well wish to supplement. The reference point here is the formal funding agreement between the council and the trust, and as I think members are well aware, that requires the trust to submit its proposed business plan by a set date in November. That gives the council the opportunity to consider, evaluate, and give feedback to the trust, and typically that, you know, the funding anticipates dialogue, as has always taken place between the council and the trust, leading to hopefully a settled position by the time the council meets for its budget. We've never actually encountered, thankfully, a position where we've reached an impasse. From memory, I think were that to happen, the existing budget holds forward until such time as a agreement is reached. But as I say, I would potentially defer to colleagues in governance that may want to make further comment on that point, Provost. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smale. I think Mr. Moody is going to come in on this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I would confirm all that Brian has said to Council is accurate. So fundamentally, it's for the Trust to propose the business plan to Council. It's for Council to approve the business plan, and the Council makes the service payment in line with the business plan that's improved.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other questions, Councillor Reid?
Yes, so it's done democratically.
You need to unmute.
What?
No, I can hear him.
Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay, Provost.
No, can you still hear him?
Do you want to continue?
That's
speaking?
you. That's you, Councillor Reid.
As far as the HR, legal and financial services are concerned, where does the Trust source them?
Back to Brian.
The long-standing arrangement from the inception of the Trust is that core support services of the ilk that you've mentioned are provided by the Council.
Yes, democratically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
And the staff conditions of service and salary, are they the same as the Council's?
Brian, would you come in again?
Again, as part of the formal agreement between the Council and the Trust, there was a clear decision to make sure the terms and conditions of the Trust were aligned with those of the Council. And perhaps a recent example of that is with respect to the furlough scheme, which provided 80% support. The Council has bridged the gap to 100% to make sure conditions of Trust staff and those of Council staff, i.e. full payment, remain aligned.
Yes.
Thank you.
So that's under Council control, yeah. There's also been reference to the membership, which we know is half Council. When it comes to repairs, what's the situation with repairs to the properties that are leased to the Trust?
Brian, maybe come in again on that repairs responsibility.
Up to a certain value, the Trust has responsibility, and over a certain value, I think it may be 10,000, but again, I would stand to be corrected on that. It's the responsibility of the Council.
So it's very much the Council involvement in all aspects of the Trust. I take Councillor Coleman's point regarding possible tax evasion accusation, but when the Barty inquiry reported to the Scottish Parliament, not just the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, they rejected the idea that this rates relief for trusts be abolished. I think probably because if that had happened, I think Glasgow, for example, would have been in a perilous condition given the facilities that they have, and so would Dundee, both SNP authorities. So it seems an inconsistency here. Looking at that point. I could ask a question about Oscar. I think there may be difficulties in taking the Trust out of Oscar. If Oscar view it as simply a tax evasion scheme, then they may not be too happy about things and may ask for some money back.
Provost, could I have a 19.1, please?
We'll go to Mr. Moody at the minute to try and answer this question for Councillor Reid. We'll come back to you.
Yes, thank you, Provost. As Councillor Reid correctly identifies, it will be necessary for Oscar to give consent to the Council's proposal to take the trust in-house, if that's the decision which is reached today. And so we will need to be clear on the reasons for that. But there are, I think, reasons identified within the report from the Chief Executive that are reasons which can be presented to Oscar in support of the Council's decision, if that is the Council's decision at the end of this debate.
I'm happy for you to allow Councillor Coleman to come at this point, Provost.
Can you hear you, Councillor Reid?
I'm quite happy for you to allow Councillor Coleman to come in at this point, just in case.
Yes, indeed. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Councillor Reid, for giving way. You mentioned that I had spoken about tax evasion. I don't think I did, and if I did, I misspoke. It's my understanding that tax evasion is illegal and tax avoidance is legal, and setting up a charity, and one of the benefits of the charity is rates avoidance. So unless I got my terminology the wrong way around, in which case I apologise again, I'm sure the record will indicate that. But I just wanted to make clear that I am not saying the council or any other charity that avoids tax is doing anything illegal. I don't think so. I'm just making the point that we are a local authority funded quite substantially by degrees of separation from taxation. It seems to me to be a slightly strange idea that we would take away from the larger tax pot. So Mr. Smale may clarify this, but whichever one is not illegal is the term I was using, and I'm fairly sure Councillor Reid perhaps mistakenly used the term which was illegal. I'm not saying the council has done anything illegal at all.
Right, thank you for your clarity, Councillor Coleman. Councillor Reid, any other questions?
Just to say that, yes, I may have misheard Councillor Coleman, for which I in turn apologise.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Just one final point. No, just one final point. The status quo is not a static position. The status quo that we last voted on was that measures would be taken to try and bring the trust and the council together, which would be, I think, an evolutionary process. So I thought. It's well summed up in Ms Campbell's final paragraph. We believe that interests of the community are best served by, sorry, I've not got my glasses, by refocusing our collective energy and effort on how best to reinvigorate a strategic partnership. And by doing so, we believe we can achieve real benefit for the community. So the amendment is simply that we continue to work with the status quo, we continue to work with the trust. And I think it would be remiss, since I think we know the way the vote's going, not to pay a huge compliment to Maureen and her staff. It's been a pleasure to work with them in the trust. As Councillor Nichols said, Councillor Mahoney and myself were the midwives to this particular baby. And it's really sad to see it potentially disappear. But, thank you, Alice, for your indulgence. Thank
you for your input. Councillor Black, did you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I'm saying 19.1, and why that is because right throughout this debate there has been allegations of name calling. There has been no name calling. There has been mention of words like ridiculous, a mad idea, ludicrous, grave from different members from the Labour group, but that is not name calling. And also several of us have asked to hear from Councillor Spears. We were not saying that he was doing anything different from any other portfolio holder. We were simply asking to hear from him, and I'm very glad that we did. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Meikle, do you like to sum up?
Thank you, Provost. I will try and do my best, but there's just a couple of points that I do want to address that haven't been picked up by my colleagues. I want to make a correction to Councillor Bissett in relation to the investment plan that was put forward by the administration. The 50 million was not for the HQ. And if you go back and check the reports, you would find out there was proposals for investment in Bowness, Grangemouth and around our schools, particularly in the Braes, to enable better community access. And that was pre any allocations or discussions around the town centre or the HQ in relation to that. And I do believe that if we'd been able to take decisions at that point, then we would have moved on considerably, and that the SPR would not have been at the slow pace that it has been moving. In relation to the name calling, I'm pleased that people are recognising that that is divisive and not constructive at all, and that is a revelation for this council, and I do hope it does continue, because I did feel for Councillor Spears, considering it was the Labour group were the master of keeping him off the trust as a portfolio holder going forward, and it's only in recent times that he's been able to be fully involved within the trust. Disappointed again at the way that the Labour group have proposed decisions that have not been taken about what is going to close. There's no decisions on what is going to close. There is no plan already there, and all that does is stir up and upset communities, and that is not helpful to our community conversations and actually having the involvement with the communities. It does give him the soundbite in the press, and we know that that's what it's for. Similarly, around the £1 million, the £1 million and around the rates. Yeah, that is a problem that we do have to tackle, but I believe that with the business plan being developed around bringing the trust back in, that will begin to be mitigated, and the cost will reduce as we go forward, because there are things that will very easily be able to come out of that potential area. Again, I mean, we have comments, and I've got a lot of sympathy with what Councillor Reid was saying at the end there, and I do feel for Maureen and her staff, because they have tried very hard to do what they think the council wants them to do, and we have seen various iterations of business plans be put forward. Members say, no, we're not taking that, we're not taking that, not taking that, and decisions have been made. And as a result, that there's been financial pressures then pushed on to other parts of the council that are really now down to the bone, and we have prevented some of the changes within the trust and within what the facilities the trust managed by not taking decisions around some of those buildings, and therefore freeing up potential investment that could go back into those communities. So it was really frustrating to hear the Labour group that are quite happy to continue as we are, allowing some of the buildings that have had decades of lack of investment, and I'm not picking on any one administration in that, to fall over and be lost, rather than taking a proactive decision and doing something about it. And that probably comes down to one of the real crux of why we've got to where we are. And then having a single decision maker, it comes back into the council, and it is then us collectively as councillors, not the trust, that have to be accountable for that decision. And I think that is a really remiss of us as elected members to continue to let that happen without creating what we need for our communities, and is good, modern, up-to-date facilities that will meet their long-term needs, than continuing with buildings that are getting to their last legs. And I appreciate that we're probably talking about a minority that are at that very critical position, but that is stopping the ability to free up investment that would allow that difference to be made. And that's one of the key democratic reasons I feel that we need to be bringing the trust back in house. We will look to pay the staff across, we'll look to integrate them into the council structures, and look to mitigate the impact as much as possible. But it's time that we actually start to take on board some of these hard decisions and explain to our communities why we're doing things and actually get on with the job that we have been tasked to do. It's not easy to make those decisions, but you know, we can't continue to just put our head in the sand and go through this constant cycle of the trust bringing forward proposals and us rejecting them, and not taking a reality check. And I think the only way we can do that is if we are the sole decision maker, and can look to create some of the savings that will free up the capacity by integrating the trust back into the council. So I really do hope that people can support this motion and we can move forward and we can look to a more positive future as we come out of COVID. There was talk of it not being the right time. I don't think there would ever be a right time or a wrong time to make a decision like this, but we can't just keep kicking it into the long grass. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thanks to everybody. I think it's been a very frank and open debate. Everybody has had an opportunity, and we're now going to go straight to the vote. Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Provost. There is a motion which is moved by Councillor Meiklejohn and seconded by Councillor Kerr, which has both been displayed and circulated to members, against which there is an amendment moved by Councillor Bissett and seconded by Councillor Coombs that consists of the option in 2.111 in the report, which is to maintain the current arrangements with the Trust at the present time. Provost Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Aitchison.
Amendment.
Apologies, Councillor Aitchison. I just had some problems with my sound. If you could say that again.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander.
Motion.
Councillor Balfour.
The motion.
Councillor Binney.
Motion.
Councillor Bissett.
Amendment.
Councillor Black.
Amendment.
Councillor Blackwood.
Amendment.
Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Coleman.
The motion.
Councillor Colley.
The motion.
Councillor Coombs.
For £1 million worth of reasons, the amendment.
Councillor Flynn.
The motion.
Councillor Garner.
Motion.
Councillor Goldie.
He's muted.
Councillor Goldie, I think you may have been on mute.
You're still
Again, amendment.
Thank you.
Right, sorry.
Councillor Grant.
Motion.
Councillor Harris.
For the motion.
Councillor Hughes.
For the motion.
Councillor Kerr.
For the motion.
Councillor McHugh.
For the motion.
Councillor McCluckie.
Amendment.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
For the motion.
Councillor Monroe.
Motion.
Councillor Murtagh.
The motion.
Councillor Nicholl.
For the motion.
Councillor Nimmo.
Amendment.
Councillor Patrick.
For the motion.
Councillor Reid.
For the amendment.
And Councillor Spears.
For the motion.
Thank you. Provost, there are 20 votes for the motion. There are 9 votes for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you for that. Now it's 3 minutes to 12 o'clock. It's an opportunity for a comfort break. So it gives you an opportunity if you want to get a cup of tea, and we'll be back here at 12:15 to restart. Thank you very much.
Yes, Provost.
Right, thank you. We'll just double check to make sure that everybody's back in place before we reconvene. Everybody there? Okay, thank you very much. That takes us to item 4 in your agenda. Today, it's the housing revenue account and council house rents 2021 to 2022. Now, Stuart Ritchie will present the report, and it's pages 27 to 44 in your agenda papers. Thank you, Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you, Provost. I'll start off just with a couple of opening remarks. The rent report and the capital report that follows are intrinsically linked, and members will see that from reading the reports and hopefully from my 2 presentations this morning. I'd also like to start by thanking David McGee and his team, Kenny Gillespie and his team and colleagues in finance for all the work that they have done in pulling this morning's reports together. The housing revenue account needs to be self-financing. Income comes from domestic rents and commercial rents and is required to meet the expenditure demands on the housing revenue account. By way of context, the council has, roughly speaking, 16,500 tenants, just over half of whom are in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit. So these tenants will be fully protected from any rent increase. Section 4 of the report looks at our performance as a housing authority, and I think that's quite a strong performance, and members will see that from the performance indicators that are there. I think important to highlight is that 70 pence in every pound on our rents is either to pay for day-to-day maintenance of our housing stock or the capital charges associated with a housing investment programme. Section 5 of the report deals with how we ensure that our housing stock meets the Scottish Housing Quality Standard. And if you add to that investment the planned investment on new build and buybacks, then we're looking at a housing capital programme for the next 5 years of somewhere in the region of £330 million. So roughly speaking, that's something around £66 million per annum. And in the report, we just compare that to where we were 10 years or so ago, and our capital programme was somewhere in the region of £19 million. So investment is, roughly speaking, 3 times the level that it was 10 years ago. Now that's great for our housing stock and our tenants, that we've got the ability to have that increased capital investment, but it also means increased capital charge for the revenue account. As I mentioned earlier, that account needs to be self-financing, so that pressure from capital charges falls on rents on future years. We set out in the rent report last year the fact that looking at a longer term projection of our investment needs, we thought that our rents would need to increase by somewhere in the region of 3% per annum in order to make our future capital programmes affordable. And having updated and reviewed the model this year, that's still our view that we need to be increasing our rents by around 3% per annum. Section 8 of the report picks up on tenant consultation. We've got an obligation to consult our tenants on any proposed changes to rents. We did that over the course of October and November, and a copy of that consultation document is appended to your report today. And I know that members got a copy of that consultation leaflet when it went out in October. Consultation was sought on the views of tenants on rent increases over a 3-year period, just to provide a bit of context to elected members when they come to reach a decision on rents for 21-22. The table set out in section 8.3 provides information on the tenant feedback on the 4 options that were included in the consultation leaflet. As I said earlier, we need to be looking at 3% per annum over the medium to long term. So the 4 options set out give just different patterns and models as to how we get back to that 3%. Members will note that the most popular option arising from that feedback was increases of 2% per annum over each of the next 3 years. Section 9 of the report looks at rent affordability and rent arrears. So in the latter part of Section 9, we look at the issue of rent arrears. Rent arrears are growing. Guess that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. From the analytics that we've done, we set out the fact that we think that it's growing particularly in a group of tenants who can pay but aren't choosing to pay at the moment. So we're doing some work there to see what progress we can make. We also make reference in that section to the Tenant Hardship Fund that's been set up, £200,000 been set up in the current year, of which only 60,000 has been used thus far. We estimate that somewhere in the region of £600,000 of increased rent arrears will not end up being collected, so will need to be written off. COVID has meant that we've been unable to spend all of the HRA money in 2021. That means that we've been unable to spend all of the money allocated on housing maintenance, and that's a result of the COVID restrictions that have been in place in some shape or form since March. The outcome of that is that we're projecting an underspend of just over £2 million for 2021, and that was reported to the executive last week as part of the overall revenue update position. That underspend of just over £2 million for the current year can be added to the current reserve that we have of just over £5 million. The underspend in the current year allows us a short-term opportunity to have a rent increase below 3%, and I hope members will agree that would be helpful in the current economic climate for our tenants. I've mentioned a number of times the need to keep an eye on the need to return to a rent increase of 3% per annum to make sure that capital programmes are affordable. But there is an opportunity in the short term, and that's probably between 1 and 3 years, to have rent increases below 3% to use up that underspend generated in the current year. And I would remind members of the outcome of the tenant consultation process, where their preferred option was a smooth rent profile over the course of the next 3 years. The administration's proposed rent increase is set out in Appendix 4 of the report. That's a proposed rent increase of 2% for 21-22, and that's brought about by using around about £600,000 of the 2021 underspend. Provost recommendations are set out in paragraph 2 of the report. I'm happy, along with colleagues, to answer any questions that elected members have. Thank you.
Okay, Mr Ritchie, thank you very much for that report. Councillor Meikle-John, is it yourself or the portfolio holder?
It's Councillor Hughes that will be taking this one, Provost.
Okay then.
Good afternoon, Provost. Good afternoon, everyone. I have put forward a motion in terms of recommendations. I'll quickly just read it to you, which I also sent the motion to, it was sent to Mr Pirrie. However, in terms of the motion, it's Council is asked to 2.1, agree a rent increase of 2% for financial year 2021-22, including the use of 0.6 million reserves as set out in Appendix 4 of the report. 2.2, approve the housing revenue account budget for financial year 2021-22 as set out in Appendix 2 of the report. And 2.3, note the indicative budgets and rent levels for 22-23 through to 2025-26 as representing the best available information at this time. Provost, in setting rent charges, we must have regard to the following factors. There is an obligation on social landlords to consult with tenants regarding proposals to change rents. Social landlords must have regard to tenants' views in setting new rent levels. Social landlords must prepare a strategy, a tenant participation strategy. There is also a requirement on registered social landlords to consider affordability when setting rents. The housing revenue account must be self-financing from rents, value for money must be achieved, and the housing revenue account must be sustainable. Appendix 3 outlines the 2021-24 rent increase consultation to tenants. Around about 16,500 consultation questionnaires were issued by post, 1,398 responses were returned. This represents a response rate of 8.5%. The rent consultation outcome indicated majority support for a 2% increase for each of the next 3 years. Appendix 4 outlines the house rental charges by house size based on each rent increase option, and it takes into consideration non-housing rental charges. The administration proposes a rent increase for 2021, which also includes other rental charges of 2% as outlined in option 3. Due to the effects of COVID-19 restrictions, there has been an underspend of 2.2 million, and as a result of this situation, housing revenue account reserves are projected to increase to 7.3 million. A reserve balance circa £5 million is considered to be prudent to meet the future revenue and capital investment requirements. It is considered that a minimum of 3% rent increase is considered necessary in future years. The administration also proposes the use of 0.6 million reserves to meet the shortfall after proposing a 2% rent increase. The mechanics of these proposals are set out in Appendix 2. The 2% increase as set out in Appendix 2 will draw in rent of £1,191,000, and by using £597,000 from reserves, the combined total of rent increase and reserves covers the income gap and matches the total expected expenditure of £68,860,000, therefore ensuring that the housing revenue account is balanced, self-financing and sustainable. Housing revenue account reserves after transactions will be 6.7 million for year 2021-22. In setting a 2% increase as rent, it should be noted that 9,500, that's 56% of council tenants, are in receipt of housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit. This means that over half of our tenants are fully protected from any change in their rent. When setting the budget for the housing revenue account, some of the main influences which are considered include employee expenses, property costs, capital charges, and council house stock. Also ring-fenced is £1.4 million, which has been transferred to the Integration Joint Board for example, housing aids, adaptations and garden aid. Currently, £200,000 from the housing revenue account was allocated to create a tenancy support fund to assist any tenant financially impacted by COVID-19. Paragraph 9.7 highlights that just under £60,000 of the support fund has been used so far. Paragraph 9.8 highlights that it is estimated that around £600,000 of increased rent arrears will ultimately not be recovered and will require to be written off. This is an excellent comprehensive report which demonstrates strength through the breadth of its content and depth by way of its detailed information. Council is asked to 2.1 agree a rent increase of 2% for financial year 2021-22, including the use of £0.6 million reserves as set out in Appendix 4 of the report. 2.2 approve the housing revenue account budget for financial year 2021-22 as set out in Appendix 2 of the report. And 2.3 note the indicative budgets and rent levels for 2022-23 through to 25-26 as representing the best available information at this time. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Have you a seconder?
Provost, it's Councillor Bowes. Can I firstly say that I'm happy to second the portfolio holder and his detailed proposal here. I believe that it's important, though, that we note that Falkirk has the 6th lowest rent in Scotland. We have the 7th highest level of repairs and improvement expenditure. And finally, the 10th lowest supervision and management costs. This is a credit, and I know Stuart had to thank people earlier, but this is a credit to Stuart, Kenny, David, and every member of staff from the frontline trades to the office staff through to the general management at Falkirk Council. That is an incredible result and performance by you. There is always, as ever, room for improvement, dare I say, but I've got to say what you do allows our tenants to have some of the best quality of housing in the whole of Scotland, and I think as a councillor I personally thank you for that. Obviously, reading item 10.6 it covers the reasons why you'll have inflationary pressures and various other bits and pieces that we obviously have to have a rent increase. And I think the 2% for this year, and obviously then consideration of 2% for the following years, and that obviously been covered by the underspend for this year, makes sense to do that. I'm not going to go on for a long time because I think Gordon gave us as much detail as we would possibly want. And I just repeat again that I'm absolutely delighted to second the portfolio holder in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. I would like to thank Mr Ritchie and his teams, particular mention to David McGee and Kenny Gillespie. I know housing have been subjected to a lot of challenges recently and been stepping up to the mark, and I think they all do an excellent job. Mr Ritchie provided us additional information we needed to arrive at a decision on the rents increase. After much discussion, the Labour Group have decided that a 2% increase is the most appropriate in this economic climate. This is also in line with the consultation, which saw 607 respondents, which is 43%. Out of 1,398 agreeing with option 1, which is 2% for 21-22 and indicative 2% for 22-23 and 23-24. This 2% rise equates to a weekly increase of £1.41, giving a weekly rent of £71.87, which is approximately £25 per week cheaper than the private sector. There is an underspend of £2.2 million. If we use 600,000 of this underspend, that's effectively the council still having a 3% rent increase income and will allow the housing investment programme to stay on track. So, Provost, we agree recommendation 2.1, same as the administration, 2%, and use of the 600,000 from the underspend. Recommendation 2.2, we approve the housing revenue account budget for 2021-22 as set out in Appendix 2, subject to any necessary adjustments. And recommendation 2.3, We note the indicative budgets and rent levels for 2022-23 to 2025-26 as representing the best available information at this time. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now go to Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, we had a long discussion like the other groups, and it would have been easy to have suggested no increase or 1% increase. What would have wiped out our savings that we have accumulated this year? Agreeing the 2% allows us to invest in the future housing in Falkirk Council. We are happy to support the 2% increase and the motion put forward by Councillor Hughes.
Okay.
I'm not finished, Provost.
Sorry, apologies.
This situation doesn't happen very often, Provost, when all three groups agree a motion, and we're quite happy to support the motion going forward. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Sorry for the interruption. Councillor Blackwood had his hand up. What would you like to say, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Firstly, I'd like to say that it's nothing new that Mr. Ritchie and his team present an absolutely fantastic job in the housing area. This has been on for years, as long as I've been a councillor, and I thank them for that. Obviously, the 2%, we're agreeing with them. We're not putting up an amendment. We're listening to the tenants through their consultation, and they've supported the 2%. We're listening to that and accepting that. Obviously, the pandemic has created the underspend, and in doing so, it's resulted in repairs and improvements put on hold, and it's creating a backlog. And just one question I'd like to ask is, when we return to some forms of normality, will we be able to, in any way, escalate this programme to get us back on track? That's just the question I wanted. Thank you.
Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you, Provost. That's a really good question. And I think that the reality is that once we get back on track and we know what we're living with, then we'll do as much work as is possible because we know we've got the funds there to do it. But I think that it's unlikely that we're going to do 18 months worth of work in a 12-month period, for example. So I think we'll go as fast as we can, but there's going to be limitations as to just exactly how much we're able to do, just for a variety of reasons that members will understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goldie had your hand up. You need to unmute.
Sorry, Provost. When Mr. Ritchie was speaking, he was competing with the washing machine here, so I didn't quite pick up what he said about the capital programme. But what would be, I know it's in the next report, but what I would be interested to find out is what was the capital programme when this administration took place, i.e. what were the figures in the last capital programme of the Labour-Tory administration?
Have you got that available information, Mr. Ritchie?
Don't have that to hand, Provost, but I'm happy to go back, find that information and circulate it to members. I think that the purpose of the comparison in the report, I think, was just to show just how much the capital programme has grown over the course of the last 10 years, and that's really been brought about by the investment in our stock to achieve the Scottish Housing Quality Standard, but also the introduction of buybacks and new build as well. But I'm happy to get the information that Councillor Goldie has asked for and circulate it accordingly.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Thank you for that, Provost. Could I just say that I'm quite confident there was more money in the last capital programme, the last administration, than there is now. But I'll wait the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, just to clarify the situation, with a motion moved and seconded, no amendments coming forward, but I believe there's one or two councillors want to have an input. Councillor McCluckie.
Thanks, Provost. Aye, it would just be, once again, kind of reiterating what folk had said earlier. Clearly, this is an excellent report. As I say, it's put over very well by the portfolio holder. Unlike one of our councillors, I don't think we can do much better, actually, to be honest. Try to give credit where it's due to both for the officers here. You can't have the 6th lowest rent and yet still have the 7th highest level of repairs. You know, you could have one or the other do better, but the other one would suffer. I think it's a great balance, it's a great report, and it's great statistics, and I'd like to thank the officers for that. I'd also say that pound for pound, it's the best way of getting accommodation in Scotland. I think our rents, we have £25 cheaper on average than a housing association, and yet our houses are meeting the standards set by us, and the new build are fantastic built. As I say, it's £25 cheaper than the housing associations, and by far cheaper again than the private lets. We can see that by we've got 16,500 houses, and we've over 12,000 people on the waiting list looking for accommodation. That's because people, many of whom have had to go into the private sector, find themselves in economic difficulty in these times, and that's why we're getting more and more people applying to the council, and why we must keep up the capital programme and continue to buy back and continue to build quality homes for the constituents. So thanks very much.
Thank you for your input. So we'll agree the motion that's came forward unanimously. Have we agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Provost.
Yeah, can you see who's speaking? Councillor Reid.
I'll bring it up under the next item.
Okay, fine, thank you. So we'll just to go back again to clarify, we've agreed the motion that came forward unanimously. Agreed. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
This takes us now to item 5 in your agenda, the Housing Investment Programme. Mr. Ritchie will present the report, and it's pages 45 to 55. Thank you, Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you, Provost. So the capital programme looks out over the course of the next 5 years. As I mentioned in the previous report, we're looking at investment of somewhere in the region of £330 million over that 5-year period. We get some funding from the Scottish Government to help us in that investment, and that Scottish Government support comes in the way of grant for new build and grant for buyback. So over the course of the next 5 years, we're expecting to get government grant of just over £40 million for these purposes. So that means that the balance of the capital programme of about £290 million falls to be funded through prudential borrowing, i.e. the rents. The capital report firstly looks back at the current year and notes the underspend that we have on the 2021 programme, and that's estimated to be about £48 million. And again, that was reported to the Executive last week as part of the capital programme update report. And the reasons for that underspend on the programme are set out at section 3.6 of the report, and I know members are well aware of these reasons. The capital programme is a combination of investment in our current housing stock to make sure that they're SHQS and EIS compliant, and the procurement of additional housing stock through new build and buyback. So the report starts by looking at the improvements in our own housing stock, and section 4 covers the main headings for improvement, and members will be familiar with these headings. And total planned expenditure is somewhere in the region of about £180 million over that 5-year period. I draw members' attention to a couple of areas. Firstly, in general, the works that are planned to make sure that we are EIS compliant, and that will help reduce the carbon emissions from our properties. And the second area to point out is the continued provision in the capital programme for alternative heating systems in off-gas areas. And I think those members in the wards affected by that know where we are with that. SGN have a decision, I think, to take hopefully this month. Section 5 looks at new build and buybacks, total planned investment, just over £150 million. The table in section 5.4 is lifted from the SHIP report that was considered by the executive before Christmas, and that looks at plans for future new build properties of just over 620 over the period. Section 5.6 talks about the cash pressures associated with new build. Current tenders looking at somewhere in the region of about £200,000 per unit, and that pushes up borrowing. Section 5.7 of the report looks at buybacks. We'll look at somewhere in the region of about 80 properties to buy back a year. I think important to note that the capital programme doesn't operate on an annual basis. So included in the 5-year programme, we're about to enter into a multi-year contract for replacement of doors and windows, similarly for new build projects as well. So effectively we are forward committing capital charges into the HRA rent account. Before you, Provost, is a significant capital programme, but that significant capital programme needs to be resourced, otherwise it is just a programme. And as part of the recommendations and included in the report, we're looking for approval to increase the resources in the design unit of development services, and that's through formalising the permanent establishment within Douglas's design team, but also just looking at what other resources that are required to make sure we can deliver on this programme. Members who were here when we went through the last window and door replacement will know, for example, just the importance there is of having boots on the ground to liaise with tenants and with contractors when we're undertaking that work, to make sure that that is undertaken as smoothly as possible. So there's some commentary included at the tail end of the report on the need to look at the HR resources within development services design team, and that's included in the recommendations, Provost, that are set out in section 2 of the report. And again, I'm happy to answer questions that members have along with colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ritchie, for that report. Are we going back to the portfolio holder? Is it Councillor Hughes?
Yes, thank you, Provost. Once again, I have a motion to put to Council. I'll just read the two sections. Council is asked to 2.1 agree the housing investment programme as set out in Appendix 1 of the report, covering the financial years 2021-22 through to 2025-26, and 2.2 grant delegated authority to the Acting Director of Development Services in consultation with the Director of Corporate and Housing Services to amend the Building Design Unit permanent staffing establishment, subject to appropriate financial provision being available to support the effective delivery of the housing investment programme. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Have you got a seconder?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Provost. The underspend last
year.
I
haven't actually made my speech yet, Gary.
Sorry, I thought you had.
No, Provost just asked if I had a seconder.
Yeah. Carry on, Gordon.
Thank you, Provost. This year has been a really challenging year because of COVID-19. Paragraph 3.6 of the report outlines how COVID-19 has significantly impacted on the delivery of the 2020-21 Housing Investment Programme. For example, lockdown and the cessation of construction, furloughing of staff within the construction sector, restrictions on accessing properties, and home working and associated difficulties in accessing data. Investment in housing has been building year on year from the previous administration to the current administration. What we have in this report is a continuity of approach which recognises the value of investing not just in bricks and mortar, but also investing in the people of Falkirk. It is estimated that a total of £332 million will be required over the next 5 years, an average of circa 66 million per annum. And in comparison, the report shows us that on average, previously, on average, £19 million per annum was the budget approved in 2010, and today is a threefold increase. Also, the budget has nearly doubled in the last 3 years. However, we are aiming to deliver a really ambitious programme of work in the coming year for our tenants. Paragraph 5.4 of the report demonstrates our commitment as a council to provide new homes across the Falkirk Council area. New build council housing is expected to provide a further 623 new homes. Locations include Hall Glen, Bonnybridge, Torwood, Denny, Banknock, Coleman, Bainsford, Langleys and Stenhousemuir. These developments will increase the total council's new build homes to over 1,000 new houses. Also, it is intended to continue with a programme of buying back ex-council properties. Around 80 additional homes per annum are currently being acquired, with circa 600 additional homes acquired to date. In Appendix 1, a proposed expenditure profile is set out covering, for example, elemental improvement works, energy efficiency works, estate improvements, priority initiatives, health and safety. Also, provision has been made totalling £3 million in 2021-22 and £2.5 million in year 22-23 to provide more cost-effective heating systems for tenants within off-gas areas. A total of £36.5 million to be spent in 2021-22. Also, Appendix 1 highlights non-improvement expenditure, for example, new build housing, property buybacks, a total of £17 million. Under resources, we have a total expenditure of £53.5 million. In total, an estimated expenditure of £107 million in 2021-22. Appendix 2 highlights that borrowing over the next 5 years will rise from £234 million to £430.8 million. Capital financing costs of the Housing Revenue Account income will increase over the next 5 years from 21% to 36%. Also, capital expenditure over the next 5 years is outlined. Paragraphs 7.10 and 7.11 highlight that due to the increased scale of the programme going forward, additional staffing resources will be required to support the delivery of the programme. Members are asked to approve the procedure of delegated authority to amend the permanent staffing establishment, subject to appropriate financial provision being available. Without the hard work of our staff, their commitment to ensuring that excellent progress is made in developing these ambitious plans, Falkirk Council would not be recognised as an innovative and creative council. Can I ask that Council agrees to recommendations 2.1 and 2.2. 2.1, agree the housing investment programme as set out in Appendix 1 of the report, covering the financial years 2021-22, through to 2025-26. And 2.2, grant delegated authority to the Acting Director of Development Services in consultation with the Director of Corporate Housing Services to amend the Building Design Unit permanent staffing establishment, subject to appropriate financial provision being available to support the effective delivery of the Housing Investment Programme. And thank you everyone once again for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. We now go to your seconder, Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Provost. I did think Councillor Hughes would have been a bit short the last time. Can I say that I totally understand the underspend on the programme in the last year. It has been one of the hardest years, I think, for the construction industry. They were closed down for 3 months solid, completely, but obviously for the right reasons. Then it returns, the construction industry has returned, and I know Stuart and his team have obviously had to be very aware of this. You've then got COVID restrictions and things like that have been put into construction, which has slowed it down. And people trying to do 10 months worth of work in 5 months just was never actually really going to happen. So it was always going to be this situation. I do know in the report the average cost of the house, which is noted at 200,000 for the entire process, not just actually the construction. I do welcome the fact that we're now going through Scotland Excel, and we're watching to see how the framework which Scotland Excel has put together comes out. Falkirk Council have got a great record at this moment with Scotland Excel. We actually get the highest return for the fees that we pay in it in the whole of Scotland. If anybody wishes to see that, I'm quite happy to send you out the report that Scotland Excel did on that. So they're actually our purchasing side, again, coming under corporate and housing, do exceptionally well on that side. And they've got to be sort of avoided congratulating them in the last one, but they do definitely get at this. That will also hopefully give us a consistency of cost as we move forward through the programme, rather than having major fluctuations. Buybacks are always welcome. It was a policy that was put up, and I know a lot of people benefited from the right to buy. Buybacks tend to be, well, for a number of reasons, but the one that always worries me is people who are in financial problems. But at least we're there to buy back on these properties. It's one that I think that is building back a lot of the stock that we probably had before. I strongly welcome the building of 623 homes that are detailed in the plan, because the more homes and the quality of the homes, and I'm sure quite a few of us have seen the quality of homes that the Falkirk Council are building, has got to be welcomed. The doors and window replacement programme is one which I know a lot of my own constituents will be keen to see, and I suspect I think we're 23, 24 before my own constituency comes into that. But it's something which is very important. And to that end, I think the delegated authority to development services becomes very, very important. That's to ensure the quality and the efficiency of this programme, because the better the quality and the efficiency, the easier it is to go through it, and it just makes the whole running of that side of the organisation will be better. So with that, I happily, again, second the portfolio holder and the motion that he's made. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to let Councillor Reid know that I haven't forgotten about his question, but I'll go first of all to Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. We agree with the recommendations. I'd like to thank Councillor Hughes for his, as usual, excellent breakdown and great report. I'd like to ask a question on 2.2 though, is that about the granting of delegated authority to the Acting Director of Development Services regarding the permanent staffing, etc. It seems a bit general. It doesn't give any detail on how many staff has been talked about and how much it's going to cost. And I believe the costs will come for the capital programme, but it's a kind of general paragraph. It doesn't give a great deal of detail, but I know exactly what's been asked for, if you know what I mean. So I'd just like a wee bit of expansion on that, and I've got a couple of questions, other questions, but if I could maybe just get somebody to answer specifically 2.2, please, then I'll come back to my couple of questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Ritchie or Mr. Duff, who wants to answer that question via Councillor Bissett. Who's it going to be?
I'm happy to respond to that, Provost. This is the design team who support the delivery of the housing investment programmes, and there's a team dedicated to the window and door replacement programme and another to the new build programme. So there's around 14 staff support the window and door programme and another 13 on the new build programme. That's the estimate of positions that we think are necessary to deliver each of these packages of work. There's around a dozen temporary posts within those teams just now, and we're looking to augment that with additional staff. So we're looking to transfer some staff to become permanent. There will probably be some additional temporary recruitment to undertake. We are still doing more work on that just to verify the costing and the approach to this, and that's why we're looking for the wherewithal to move that forward and proceed. We would obviously be discussing that with Stuart and his team, and the whole programme would be supported through the fee income for capital works that's associated with the programme.
Thank you. Carry on, Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. I maybe look forward to an update on that at some point. 4.5 is on energy efficiency. Now, there's quite a lot of energy efficiency works going on, and I just wondered, are we working hand in glove with the climate change people to try and capture the carbon dioxide reductions based on energy efficiency? I was trying to calculate that and feed it in. I know we had a discussion the other day about that there's a lot of different groups within the council that are looking at the climate change and are trying to feed back in and collect the data. I just wonder if housing is collecting as much data as they can to feed back in. And my other question is on off gas. I know up in Salmanen they were looking to get gas up in Salmanen. There was issues up there, and I just wonder where we are with Scottish Gas Networks. They were going to get in touch in January, so I just wonder if they've been in touch. Thank you.
Douglas, would you like to come in the first question?
Happy to do that, Provost. Yes, I certainly confirm that the climate change worked very closely with the team in Stuart's housing section around the delivery of our contribution towards meeting the climate change targets. So there's been quite a considerable effort done through our local heat and energy efficiency strategies to map out the relationship of the housing investment programme with the wider expectations to reduce carbon in those areas. So yes, we are very much working together on that, and we would hope through the further work that's taking place on climate change to be able to quantify the anticipated reduction in emissions that we anticipate from the programme.
Thank you. Kenny Gillespie or David McGee would like to come in on that. Last question.
Is there any answer on the off gas
okay.
for Salmanen?
Yes, I've asked Kenny or David to come in on that one.
I'll come in on that one if that's okay. Thanks. Yeah, in terms of the off-gas area, we are very much dependent upon decision-making with Scottish Gas Networks, and the last update was that they had a board meeting towards the end of January. As at today, we don't have an update of what that board meeting outcome is. It's very much dependent upon their decision-making regarding funding that they will receive in relation to sort of installs and grant funding. So we would anticipate
sort of getting that information hopefully by the end of this month, and as soon as we have that, we'll feed back to all members, including those the local members as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. I'll be brief, Provost. I'd just like to thank Stuart and David and Kenny and all their teams for 2 good reports, great reports. A lot of hard work's been put into them. And it doesn't matter what query you have, they always get your answer back. It's maybe not always answers you want, but they come back with an answer. Very, very important that we continue with the investment, Provost. 11 new builds in the programme, and I'm sure that each area that gets the new build near them will be welcomed by the residents. Can I just ask one question before I continue, Provost? It's saying here that I know we had an issue with the old Torwood School, and it says the estimated start date will be August 20. My first question is, if that's not started, when will it start? Because that was going to be the only one that would have been finished by the time this administration had ended, and every other one would be in the new administration. So that's the first question, Provost.
We'll try and answer that. Kenny Gillespie, maybe?
Provost, I'm happy again to come in on
Right,
that.
David.
That's okay. Yeah, the Torwood development has actually started and is on site at the moment, so that work is progressing. There is a slight delay at the moment regarding some drainage works, but the actual project itself is on site as we speak.
Thank you very much, David. And as I continue, Provost, as previously mentioned by Councillor McLuckie, we have a waiting list that is far greater than the houses that we have. And I'm sure everyone will agree, whether it's the UK government or the Scottish government, over the years we haven't built enough houses, especially social houses, and to get another 623 in the Falkirk area is a great achievement. Hopefully we'll get more, but we're quite happy as a group, Provost, to support Councillor Hughes's motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. It'll be Councillor Reid first, then Councillor Goldie, and I believe Councillor Alexander's now flagging his hand up. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Just 2 questions. One is regarding the capital programme. As we all know, the provisions made in the new housing for disabled people. My concern is with ever-increasing elderly population, for whom the high flats in many cases are no longer the answer. Do we have any plans to build houses specifically for the elderly? And in relation to that question, have we any idea from the Health Board what's happening to the Falkirk Community Hospital site? Is there to be housing there?
We'll go to David for the first part, and then we'll find out who's going to answer the second part. David?
Okay, thank you, Provost. In terms of the design requirements, yes, a number of developments have provision for elderly. So, for example, the Bonnybridge Main Street development is being designed along similar lines to that in Larbert, where in Stennismuir, and that, I think that provides both an accessible sort of town centre location, but also facilities within that to support that. Similarly, other developments have that. But I think in general terms, the design is to accommodate not just sort of ambulant and disabled residents, but also elderly, so it can provide that, if you like, increase in requirements as required. So yeah, I think in general terms, each of these developments have that provision. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're going to bring in Patricia Cassidy, Councillor Reid, to answer your second part.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Just to update members, myself and members of Douglas Duff's team are meeting regularly with the equivalent colleagues in the NHS and looking at any joint areas in relation to our assets planning and development. And I'm in discussions with the Chief Executive about beginning a strategic needs assessment, which is the first stage in a process for the Health Board to develop any assets. So it is at an early stage, but we would hope over the next 6 to 12 months that we'd be progressing the first stages of that business case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Reid, anything else?
Yes, it's in relation to the last item, and indeed one or two items. It concerns high finance, which tends to lose me, to be honest. We're talking now about negative interest rates, very low inflation, something we've never experienced before coming together at the same time. I wondered if officers could do a short idiot's guide to the potential consequences of such developments for certainly my benefit and perhaps those of Councillor Burries in his capacity as well.
Okay, Brian, would you like to come in on this one?
It's a new world, basically.
Yeah. An idiot's guide, Brian.
I'm probably best placed to provide that then. I think the request is understandable and reasonable, and it is very much a changed world in so many ways. I mean, we had the financial crisis a decade ago, the factors that created that, the ramifications from it that are still flushing through, and then of course COVID of itself is a further game changer. So very much a different landscape. The point on negative interest rates is an illustration of that. I mean, in practice, we're seeing on our investment side, money market funds with whom we've traditionally placed a lot of surplus cash are now moving into charging you to hold money with them. That's not so much a negative interest rate as such. It's a low, very, very low interest rate that's just positive. But then once you add on their charges, it does in effect tip it into a negative vein. We've also got the emergence against this backcloth of what they've termed modern monetary theory, that takes a very different view on government's capacity just to spend, and there's a growing number of advocates of that as a way forward. So there's a lot in the mix there. May I suggest that either at some of seminar, if members wish that, and I know there's an outstanding request on Treasury, which we can happily merge this with. It's primarily where it sits for further training, that perhaps after the pressure of getting the budgets out the road, we arrange a seminar for members dealing with those issues, because it is complex and it's going to be with us for a while, so it's not something we necessarily need to do or progress, I would suggest, today or tomorrow. Provost, would that be an acceptable way forward for members? A seminar, an in-house seminar, maybe early March, once we've got the budget out the road.
Well, I'm quite happy with that. Councillor Reid?
Yes, thank you. That sounds like the perfect solution, Provost.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Goldie? You're mute.
I did say fudged in in case there's any lip readers. What I was going to say, Provost, is the procedures here and the reports coming forward, with the exception of the one connection with Calendar House and the trust, are very pleasing. They follow a lines, particularly in the housing, they follow the line that we expect to see from the officers, and congratulations to them. But if there's one drawback, I'm really concerned about the green agenda. Now, before anybody thinks it's something Glasgow that I'm concerned about, I wouldn't want to talk about that at the minute. But the green agenda, in the sense that we must have pulled out mile upon mile of hedges and took down hundreds and hundreds of trees, which affects the hedges, affect hedgehogs, etc. We've even dug up the lawns in these areas and put down what we call chucky stains and plastic. So the hedgehogs, field mice, etc., they really have nowhere to go. And I wonder what any of the housing officers, maybe Mr. Duff, could talk on the green agenda in relation to. I spoke before to our officer, I forget the lady's name, who's concerned, who deals with this, but I don't think there's been one bit done anything to help the green agenda in that sense. And it's particularly concerning because the hedgerows for birds, etc., they're all going to be away. And we seem to have done this, and certainly all administrations have done it, and they've done it without building in any protection for hedgehogs and birds and wildlife that use these areas. So I wonder if anybody could tell me how we're dealing with that, how much we're spending on it, and more importantly, Provost, how much more are we going to spend in the future?
Okay, who wants to tackle that?
If it helps, Provost, I'm happy to come in on that one.
Fine, Douglas.
Yeah, maybe what we could do is send on details to Councillor Goldie. There was a report at the executive last week on biodiversity and grass management that set out some proposals for a pilot project on 35 sites that would encourage the creation of green corridors that will help with biodiversity, improve life for insects and natural species. So I'm happy to send a copy of that on to Councillor Goldie. Obviously, we do very much align the work around climate change, around biodiversity, and our investment through capital programmes, the likes of the housing programme we're talking about today. The fulcrum of that is the local development plan, and that's the means of addressing how we identify sites for new housing development that are necessary for our own purposes and for private sector, and how those can be aligned with the maintenance of the natural environment, how we promote green corridors, etc., that will aid wildlife. So I think we do have quite a good means of making sure that there is proper integration of these things, and that it does align both the capital investment strategies that we have and our green agenda.
Yep. Yeah, thanks through you, Provost. Thanks to Mr. Duff. And it's wonderful that we're going to have 9 sites, or 35 sites, I think you said, but right through the Falkirk Council area, and the housing schemes when there's no hedges, the trees have been taken down. I'm happy. I'll happily go and find the report. In fact, if Douglas can send it, it's great. I'm only trying to draw attention to the fact that when we're doing renovations, etc., and I know the reasons the hedges are out, I know the reasons the grasses have all been taken away, I understand all that, but it's certainly not good enough as an ongoing concern. But thanks to Douglas, and I will get the report, Provost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify exactly where we are, we've had a motion moved and seconded, unanimously agreed by the 2 other group leaders. So there shouldn't be any debate, but go to Councillor Alexander. You need to unmute, Councillor Alexander. That's you.
In fairness, it's the first time today. The points that Mr. Goldie has just raised is a valid point, but I'm not sure why he's missed the development at Cumulus Park. in our own ward, where meadowgrass was laid and the park was made much more attractive to wildlife. The programme that I recall taking up most of the negative the negative side of the replacement was Glasgow Road, and that's where we saw the beginning of the end of the Edge roads. But in terms of the overall situation as it relates to biodiversity, then you know, that's the downside of giving tenants a choice. If most tenants have given the choice, I've said they want to pull the hedges out and they want a fence. So you know, we can't say on one hand that we're offer tenants choice, and then on the other hand say, well, in an area that you want to see change. We've done a great deal to congratulate officers in this report, and quite rightly so. But I'd just like to acknowledge the input of Gordon Hughes, one of our quieter members, and but he goes about his business in a very efficient manner. So I think we need to congratulate Gordon Hughes, and not least because the workload and the transition within the housing department itself has been so considerable, and it's really just come to light when we answer Councillor Goldie's earlier question with regards to the situation as it related to the budget process at the time of the new administration, or current administration coming in, and the figures are quite simply breathtaking, because the capital programme in the budget papers for 2017 to 2018, which is the last budget that was set under the previous administration, had an expenditure of capital expenditure of 35 million projected. This report today, 66 million, almost twice the level of investment previous administration. So the workload is such, and the pressure on officers and on Gordon to deliver is phenomenal. But they have delivered, and you know, good on them. It was important that we do restart, because Councillor Kerr is absolutely bang on in relation to his comments that there haven't been enough council houses built under the previous administrations. And you know, when we look at the 6 houses in the whole of Scotland in the last year, the Labour government in Holyrood, none of them in Falkirk, at all for the previous government. Going back even further than that, then I'm afraid the Councillor Kerr, that your own government colleagues didn't exactly give you ammunition with their refusal to allow new council housing to be built. And maybe Brian could give us an idea of how much additional monies have come from the Scottish Government for new housing since the policy was changed a number of years ago. Brian Smale.
Okay. Somebody going to answer that?
Provost, I wonder if my colleagues in housing might be better placed to answer the specific question in terms of funds for new housing.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'll pick that up. I suppose the short answer is I don't have that information to hand, but we can crawl back through the records and get it. But in broad terms, somewhere in the region of about a quarter of the cost of a new build comes to the council by way of grant from the Scottish Government, and somewhere in the region of about 3/4 of the cost of a new build needs to be funded by the council through borrowing.
my recollection is it's approximately £72 million that the council has received. But I appreciate that the secretary doesn't have that in front of him. But it's a considerable amount of money, and I spoke earlier on this morning about the additional resources that have come from Holyrood, and this has to be included within that package, and that's maybe the reason why there's such a healthy spend in terms of new housing.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander. Now, as I said originally, there's been a motion moved and seconded. There's been agreement by both groups. Is there anybody got any questions at this time to ask before we go? Okay, we've got Councillor Nimmo, Councillor McCluskey and Councillor Goldwin's back in, but questions only at this time. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Provost. It is a question. It's in relation to 5.7 regarding the property buyback scheme that we're currently operating. It's great to see that we've been able to buy back something like 600 properties and put them out as homes for our constituents. It also states that we require a further £30 million to maintain this programme over the next 5 years. And this council's assuming that the Scottish Government is going to be giving us 12 million, which leaves a balance of 18 million for us to find. I'm just wondering, how realistic is this programme and the money we're talking about with the effects of COVID and the implications that holds for us? Is this realistic? I'm just wondering if officers can maybe answer that for me.
Good question, Brian.
I'm happy to pick that up. Provost, I think Councillor Nimmo raises a good point in terms of what's the impact of COVID on this, and of course the reality is we don't know what the future holds on this. So, we've done reasonably well in the current year to continue the buyback programme. We get a resource planning assumption updated on an annual basis from the Scottish Government in terms of what we expect to get by way of grants. So, it's a bit like all of the capital programmes that we have. They're based on what our best estimates are at that time, and we'll just revise them as we get updated information. So what's set out in the programme before members is our best estimate of that programme for the next 5 years, but that'll be updated as time goes on and information crystallises.
Thanks for that, Stuart.
Councillor McCluskey, you got a question at this stage? You're on mute. You need to unmute.
Right, Provost, I've got 3 questions. The first one is to Mr. Ritchie in relation to a last comment there. I'll ask, in relation to finance from the Scottish Government, could you tell us the difference that the council's getting for an average property compared with a housing association?
Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you, Provost. So the last information that's available relates to financial year 19-20, and for social housing, the average Scottish Government funding to housing associations was about £88,000 per new build unit, and for local authorities the average was about £59,000 per new build unit.
£29,000 a property less does the council got. Previously, as I says, the councils was banned from getting the funding, unlike the housing associations. And yet we mentioned before, our rents are £25 cheaper, and there are 12,500 people because of poverty wanting council housing. My next question, Provost, is on, I see we've got 11 new build places that's been built, and obviously a great statement from the portfolio holder, but none of the 11 sites are in his own ward. I was just wondering if he could answer if there was ever a chance of getting some new housing in his own ward, because Slamanan, for example, had just up to a year ago 700 properties agreed for building, and obviously our ground's cheaper for building on than areas in Larbert and places. We've got room in the school. The community here all fully agree, rather than go through local plans where people don't want housing. Certainly we want it in Slamanan. So I was just thinking if there was a possibility of getting some new built housing, even a wee dozen or so up here in Slamanan, if Mr Hughes could answer that.
Right, Councillor McCluckie. I will ask the portfolio holder if he's got an opportunity to respond in relation to, is there any sites earmarked in your ward, sir?
I think Mr McCluckie is always likes to try and stir it a little bit. He knows full well that the local development plan was passed, and basically we've been through these discussions in the past. Also, there was a reporter made a decision in relation to the local development plan in relation to Slamanan. So as far as I'm concerned, we are tied by the decisions of reporters, that's through the DPEA and the local development plan. However, I would pass on to Mr Ritchie if he wants to add anything.
Yeah,
Mr.
thanks.
Ritchie.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'm maybe just say a couple of things, and I know Kenny wants to say something. So, yeah, I said in relation to buybacks that it's the best available information that we have at this time, and that continues to be reviewed. And our SHIP programme that is put together on possible new build sites is reviewed on an annual basis as well, and submitted to members for their consideration, and then onwards to the Scottish Government. So the opportunities to look at new build continue to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Part of the problem we have is that we don't have a lot of sites that are in our own ownership, and obviously if you start to then look at sites that are not in our own ownership, that starts to add cost, and it becomes difficult to balance out on value for money when you're paying for the cost of site ownership and then building on it. So something that's constantly under review, and if there are sites that are available that we consider to be suitable and meet the criteria, then we'll certainly bring them forward to members for their consideration. But I know Kenny wants to come in and add to the comments that I've just said, Provost.
Provost, if I could just add on, and Stuart's answered most of the things I was going to say. The one area, just to add to Stuart's words, were that we follow our housing need and demand assessment, and that's a 5-year assessment that programmes and ties in line with our local development plan. And at the time of that, it's very much, as Stuart said, is looking what the availability is and what the needs are of the area and what can be provided with the land on that. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Final question, Councillor McCluckie.
Two questions, Councillor.
No, you had one left.
One more?
Yeah.
Right, well, the question is, see when we get the new, obviously it was mentioned that we were getting new windows and doors. I mentioned this to Stuart the other day. Could we get somebody to ensure they get that foam stuff round about the window in the future? Because I can hear the full conversation for the people in the bus shelter the other side of the road. Because the windows is there, but they put the facings on before they go and put much of that foam in. So I was just wondering if this could be addressed. Obviously, Douglas says there's a team, and possibly somebody could check before they put the facings on the inside of the windows to make sure that the heat isn't going straight out. which has been happening before. And then we do seem to, this is where we've got to put silicone round the face and stew, because that kind of stops the spiders coming in and that as well. And there's some of them gigantic, you know, it comes here, you know.
Thank you, Councillor McCluckie. We'll try and get your final question answered. Who's coming in?
Councillor Gardner.
No, Mr. Gillespie is going to answer Councillor McCluckie.
Provost, thank you. I'm sure, as always, Douglas's team will be on site and we'll make sure that things will be done to the highest level. As Councillor McCluckie has said there, the foaming things that he's talked about, it's full insulated. What we are looking at is the windows and doors going forward are very much of a higher quality than before and will meet all the current regulations as well. So I'm more than confident that he'll not be able to hear what's going on at the bus stop, and certainly I'm sure it will reduce the amount of spiders that come in his house as well.
Thank you. Councillor Goldie, then Councillor Garner. Questions only this time.
Well, I don't want to take advantage of the situation, but in relation to a previous speaker and the Easter Commuters Park, know it very well, was brought up there. But that one, the flowers going in there, the wild flowers going in there, doesn't equate to what I'm talking about. We also have them in the public park, by the way.
So what's the question, Councillor Goldie?
The question now, Provost, and you've been very fair with me, and I want to have changed my way of working. So what I'm going to do is ask if somebody can bring a report forward to tell us how many houses have had their hedges taken out. No, next week, I don't mean. How many houses and the hedges and the trees? I know it's a big bit of work, so I'm not waiting on it next week.
Thank you. I'm sure that will be addressed by any officer want to come in and just say that will be addressed.
Yeah, I'm happy to say that we'll try and pull something together along with Douglas's team on that, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. Councillor Garner, questions only, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. And firstly, I'd like to associate myself with all the comments made towards Stuart Kenny and his team, and especially my team locally within Ward 3. They've been excellent, and this report is excellent, as my colleague Councillor Hughes pointed out, and he's done a great job as well. It's in connection to Councillor Goldie, and he touched on it there again. There has been mitigation put in place in relation to hedges being taken out. I don't even think this was one that this current administration brought through at the time. I think that was before my time. But I'm sure Mr. Gillespie could just give me a wee bit more background on that, and that maybe help Councillor Goldie and what he's actually looking for.
Mr. Gillespie.
Provost, one of the things that we've done since the start of the programme of putting hedges, taking hedges out, putting fences in, is working with Douglas's team and looking at now, apologies, I'll have the wrong terminology, but we do leave spaces in the fences for hedgehogs to travel through. I think it's hedgehog tunnels, but also in brick walls as well. We've worked very much to allow specifically the hedgehog to travel, and certainly also within our new building we are required to meet the green agenda as well with regards to trees and green space in proportion to the new development.
Thank you very much. Okay, there's been a lengthy debate. Has everybody agreed the motion that came forward? Have agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, before everybody goes, could I just say this, that at the moment there's been a serious increase in mental health problems associated with the pandemic. If you know of anybody, family members, friends or constituents, we have got the services out there to support them. So ensure that you give them any information, because there is a serious problem out there. And look after yourselves. Keep safe. Thank you very much, the officers and everybody else. Thank you.